Chapter 29. The Lost Diadem. Chapter text. Even though the Lost Diadem doesn't physically appear in this chapter, and a much cooler title would have been Return to Hogwarts or something. HPHPHPHPHPHPHP. Neville's back. Sirius cheered, more because he felt obligated to at this point. After everything they just heard, it was the only humor he could fall back on now. Even Harry didn't react to his joke this time, his face growing paler by the second as the memory slowly trickled back of seeing his once dorm mate, a friend, arriving in such a state, the unexpected way couldn't be thought twice of. He snatched the book into his hands and read hastily, not even sure how he could handle any more details of this miserable life he'd left behind, but still willing to try. Even Sirius forgot what he was saying a second ago by the end of that. His mouth was hanging open, and he was finally at a loss for words. Remus was livid. What in Merlin's left testicle is going on in that I can't even call it a school? That didn't happen to him in Hogwarts, Lily protested. He ran away and has been living out in the forest. Or, she trailed off miserably for how little that explained what they'd just heard. Harry hardly heard them. The description wasn't enough. He had seen it and hadn't been able to properly describe it, let alone the anger boiling inside of him for what had been done to someone he knew, someone he'd at least consider a friend. Whoever had done this was going to pay. "Oh, Merlin, he's turned into Harry," James said, with a completely straight face. Harry looked up with spluttering indignation, but the lure of finding out what had happened to Neville overruled him. "Was that supposed to make you feel better?" Sirius demanded. Harry still didn't answer, even if he agreed that wasn't an encouraging start getting into the castle. Somehow this only added to James' confusion. "They're on nickname terms. I'm getting the feeling it's not something Aberforth encourages," Remus muttered. Neville just casually appearing in here didn't align with the man they'd seen moments ago having given up hope and trying to convince Harry to. "Oh, is that all?" Lily asked faintly. "Why are more people showing up? How did Neville tell them to do this?" "Who? Mum," Harry protested, causing Lily to slowly close her mouth and agree to let Neville explain, if he would at all. "Good to know crotchety old men are still good for something," Remus chuckled. Lily and James shared a small smile for that, adding Aberforth to the list of people they needed to somehow thank for a job they'd never have to do again. All of them forced down small little shivers for that. A fight between Harry and Voldemort seemed inevitable now, what with him knowing of Harry's Horcrux hunt. "I can't believe Harry found another place we never did," Sirius protested. "In Hogsmeade of all places." "Technically, Neville found it, or Aberforth," Harry corrected. "My son's just better than all of us put together. I have no complaints." James shrugged with a very proud smirk, causing Harry to flush and Sirius to nod in agreement. "So did we," Remus sighed. All five of them sighed for that burst to their ego, not to mention the painful winces they all received for thinking what had happened to the poor students who had tested this idea. It didn't seem a very Snape-like thing to announce this. No, he would have let the kids suffer the consequences of figuring each out. "What does it say about our life that's already old news?" Lily tried to say with a little laugh. "Speak for yourself," Sirius shivered. "I don't care how many visions from Voldemort he gets. That's still going to be worse." "Please don't let Padfoot eat his words," James said to the ceiling. Harry stuttered painfully over Neville's casual use of that, and he wasn't the only one. He'd known without question from day one how much Hogwarts meant to each of them. They'd feared what would happen to it under the Death Eater's rule as much as him, and dreaded over it while he'd been away. They almost wished now Harry hadn't even come back, so they'd never have to hear how far this place had fallen. "Stuffed it into Hermione's purse, of course," Lily giggled while Sirius scowled at her. "That's his first question," Remus asked instead. "Not, why did you break into Gringotts? I'm pretty sure after all these years, the school stopped questioning whatever mad thing I got up to," Harry reminded. "We never managed to pick up on that," James shrugged. "Neville knows you well," Sirius grinned. "Imagine if he'd come along," Remus chuckled. "He could have found edible plants much better than Hermione, possibly stopped the lot of you from arguing quite so much." "I don't think Merlin himself could manage that," Harry tried to say lightheartedly, but it was all still too fresh in his mind to look back on and joke about. They'd been afraid of that from the moment of the announcements. Hearing it confirmed now was something no one was looking forward to hearing. Neville could have been speaking in tongues for all they understood of that. It was hard to imagine anything worse than that umbage. I bloody hope so, James managed, unable to picture McGonagall not kicking them from the school, but this was the best alternative there was. What is this, Durmstrang now? Sirius demanded. Lily blanched in disgust, not least of which because she wondered just how far this would stretch. If Beauxbatons and Durmstrang even knew or cared this was happening, let alone the rest of the world. And it was actually worse than they imagined. This was inhumane. This was every one of their worst nightmares coming to life, why they fought in the Order to stop this from ever happening. Remus suddenly got anxious for a whole other reason, as if he didn't have enough. Who all could hear that? Those worthless trolls, Sirius demanded. He'd never thought much about them at all except cronies of Malfoy's, and he'd never really wanted to. Lily swallowed a bit of vomit creeping up her throat. If Voldemort won, if this went on much longer, would there be anyone left to know the truth? James forced a painful sort of laugh out, easily imagining doing much the same to their face if he wasn't so busy picturing their corpses. And that is every time, in every place, Sirius vowed. I believe that, Lily said with conviction, running her hand along her son's hair, watching his face closely and fighting back a murderous rage that wasn't even there if her son had looked anything like Neville, an all too likely thing had he been attending school. Such comfort, Remus muttered, recalling the world where the only good side is death wasn't an option. It was not an outlook he'd ever wish upon anyone. They're plenty equal in my book, Lily promised. And Hermione once again saves the day, Sirius chuckled. Those coins had been a wealth of useful from the moment she'd created them. They really should invest in their own. More mad, Remus helpfully corrected. You already had to be pretty out of your mind to be doing what they were doing. There was so much wrong with what Neville kept saying they were at a loss how to get more shocked and horrified, and he still kept going. Sirius still wanted to laugh and joke, to call those people cowards, but then he kept remembering over and over the same blow just as sharp every time. These were kids, ranging from 11 to 18 at the most, trying to fight the same war the Order and everyone else was losing. No joke could make that better. Lily made a strangled sort of noise, half a laugh, half a scream of fright. For all they'd said about that woman and all the things she'd done to Neville, she didn't deserve that. That man will never catch a break, James now said, with the first bit of confidence possible since Neville had arrived and dropped all of this on them. Sirius nearly broke out crying for that poor kid. He still remembered laughing at Neville, a blundering, goofy kid who all manner of bad luck happened to. Then the sympathy and almost protective feelings emerging as he kept seeing what Neville went through, seemingly on his own, as he was never mentioned to be around friends. Now the kid finally got all the recognition he deserved from his only parent left, and he worried it was too late. This was already getting to be too much. Harry had been back on the Hogwarts grounds for, what, an hour and already learned the worst side of Dumbledore, and now this. That castle was supposed to be a safe harbor, and Voldemort had turned it into a place to question your own life. Does that lead right into Gryffindor Tower? James demanded, still entirely unsure and rather miffed. He had no clue what was going on. No, I don't think so, Harry politely informed him, not bothering to describe any better. He hadn't gotten much of a chance to view it before he'd been ambushed. Lily couldn't help but flush in anger at that. You must be kidding me. Not one little Slytherin first year has a reason to hide out with the lot of them. Not one Slytherin who's been there for 7 years stood up to defend this school. I absolutely do not believe for a second that the whole of that house has been. I know, Mum, Harry gently cut in to agree. It surprised me a bit too, but it's not Neville's fault. I guess he's never found a reason to trust one of them. Lily still looked extremely agitated. The prejudices against that house seemed taken to an even higher extreme than she'd ever imagined, and had to bite her tongue for a few moments to stop herself continuing. Oh, of course, Remus said half hysterically at this point. That makes all the sense in the world. Merlin, we used it for this once, except it wasn't to the hogshead, and it's the absolute perfect in-between to stay hidden. That school will never cease to amaze me, James beamed. Lily still made an annoyed little tutting noise, but didn't repeat herself. A fair question, Sirius agreed, his mind on Snape using the house elves to gain entrance to this place. It was an honest toss-up of how loyal they were to the headmaster or the school itself, something he'd never have imagined asking in his past. You didn't even, Remus began quietly in horror. Harry had spent 6 years in a dorm with him, and Harry had almost passed over such a different physic. What madness was this school? That's fascinating, James said genuinely, though all the wonder in the world couldn't make up for how they were hearing about it. I'm wondering how that would work, how intricate the magic is, Remus agreed, bright-eyed with curiosity once more. Would the magic simply know the person agree with the Carrows and not open the door for them? Would it let that person inside, but then somehow remove them if they did something the room deemed in support? I hope it's not that last one, Sirius snorted. I'm guessing the room doesn't have a very good sense of humor. I'm surprised it wouldn't just open up down to the kitchens. That's much more direct, Lily offered. Possibly unsafe, though, James reminded. I wouldn't put it past the Carrows to restart some kind of inquisitorial squad, keep a posting down there so students can't grab extra food. Limiting the food of the students, it's so dastardly I wouldn't put it past them, Sirius agreed viciously. Merlin's pants, he studied while he was away, Lily giggled. No need for them to know, he just had to listen to Hermione for months straight without a break, James false whispered. Because boys don't need to use the bathroom, Remus muttered in confusion. What a scandalous suggestion, Sirius sniffed, flipping his hair over his shoulder in an eerily good imitation of Lily in a mood. Sounds like they really did get most of the DA back together, James beamed. All they're missing is the 7th years and Muggleborns. I was expecting to hear of some new members, Lily still said sourly. I'm just imagining Lee Jordan catching wind of this and blathering away without so much as a safety check when he heard such a thing, Sirius chuckled. At least someone's acknowledging the insanity of it all, Remus snickered. The proper response after all the formalities. James grinned at the idea of Harry trying to explain that. Not the best impression you want to make, rallying your troops and all. Sirius frowned uneasily for how often that was bound to keep happening to Harry now. Can't get over how gung-ho they are, Remus praised. It's so late in the semester, they have no hope of passing their NEWTs now, Sirius Mark agreed. Harry glanced around and was unsurprised to once again find disapproval for this. Tried to plead. Imagine me just throwing all this out in the open, trying to explain it all when we had to keep going, and then all of them being in danger. Harry, they're already in danger, Lily patiently reminded. It's not like you have to give exact details, James agreed. They trust you enough. Just explain what you need done. You have to find a founder's object hidden in the school and see what help you can get. Maybe the room of requirement itself will give it to you, Sirius offered hopefully. Harry wanted to still argue, but he couldn't. He had no regrets in them finding out about all of this despite Dumbledore's wishes. The circle and the secret would keep growing, and who was he to control what others knew? He'd spent the majority of his time abroad hating Dumbledore for doing the same to him. Hogwarts has never been in better hands, Sirius said sincerely. Apparently the generation after them had created their own Order of the Phoenix, an even better one he'd rather join. Usually, if you have to keep repeating that, you're the one not understanding, Remus kindly pointed out, trying very hard but still failing slightly to mock him like he would James or Sirius. Because Dumbledore's been a bad influence on his life, Lily sighed. I really don't think I would have told anyone without him saying so, Harry corrected, and his mother reluctantly nodded to that, not looking any happier. Lovely timing for whoever it is, Sirius tried to say enthusiastically, but their worried Death Eaters would descend on them any second had yet gone away despite Neville's reassurances. Yes, all 5 of them were instantly cheered for that. Noah, Lily giggled. I can't imagine many a student being much better, Remus said sadly. There were still so many fates they didn't know the outcome of. I'm sure Ginny's waking the whole house already then, Sirius burst out laughing. Take back Hogwarts along the way of getting the Horcrux. I see no downside to this, Remus agreed. Harry fought back anger at being attacked from all sides, both in there and here, and kept reminding himself they all just wanted the same thing as him. I'm really starting to understand why Ron kept calling him a git, James huffed. It was never that simple. Sirius threw his head back in righteous laughter for being so right, and Harry scowled at the lot of them thinking this so funny. His innards twisted painfully. The look on his face promised this was no moment of celebration. He wished they would go back home now. I would too, James said obstinately as Harry's expression grew more grave by the second. The usual problems of trying to take a nap, Remus tragically agreed. Lily rubbed Harry's arm in sympathy as his voice became more garbled by the sentence. He was clearly growing more disoriented by all of this, but she knew better than to dare ask if he needed a break. This time both Sirius and James laughed, while Harry grew paler by the second. This was his worst fear come to life. There were so many innocent people trying to help him, and it was all going to go so terribly wrong. Listen to them, Lily agreed. Her and James had been absent from Harry's life for so long, but at least he was no longer alone with those two always around when Harry needed them most. That doesn't mean to never trust again, James said. Harry didn't need to hear the hollow way he said that or to look at his mother and see the betrayal there once more. He had to make his own choices, to make the best of his life, and let the consequences fall where they may. Not the right mood I'd go for, but not wrong either, Remus said, but the determination would come in the closer the coming battle was. Did anyone pick up the word lost in that sentence? Remus said with a stilted laugh for how hopeful that was. At least she answered, I've never even heard of that, Lily shrugged. Okay, I take it back. Ron was just prejudice against this blunt idiot, James chuckled. Serious eyes sparkled with interest, but before Harry could verbally stall him on whatever clever remark he thought was coming between the two old flames, his godfather surprised him by instead saying, What if that's it? I remember this thing. It really does just look like a part of the statue, but what if Voldemort somehow just magicked it there to blend in? That's possible, James said slowly and with hope. Voldemort's certainly capable of that, and it's no more impossible than a giant ruddy chamber being beneath our feet all those years. Oh, speaking of, Lily said in excitement, there's a basilisk down there. They don't need the sword anymore. They can go down there and grab a fang or two to be rid of the cup and whatever they find there. Brilliant, Harry said in excitement, anticipating at least something good happening in this place finally. The real question is, how did Voldemort find the real diadem to replace it? Remus asked in exasperation. I don't even want to know, Lily muttered, not needing to be told it had involved nothing good. That did get a laugh out of all of them. Even Harry gave a grudging laugh for the situation. There's some kind of poetic justice there, I'm sure, James said quietly. At least you've had experience with that. The marauders gave murmurs of confidence. This would be the least dangerous part Harry would be getting up to in a long time. And my suggestion that would have been in better hands with Ginny and the DA this whole time have only been validated, James muttered quietly enough Harry didn't hear. I think that could actually be of help, Sirius said in excitement. I know that poltergeist has been giving them hell. If you run into him, you could convince him to cause a distraction at the opposite end of the castle, like you'd once planned. Harry didn't respond, fidgeting with the pages and clearly distracted by whatever did happen next. You've clearly never heard a cannon blast, James snorted. The phoenix, as it had to die first to become a flame, Sirius offered. No, it's born from the flame, so that had to come first before it could even die, Remus countered. It's a miracle none of you idiots were in Ravenclaw, Lily giggled, the answer already on her mind. Another house she'd wish to be in rather than Gryffindor, as she loved riddles and learning about this new world she found herself in, and a variety of things she'd seen this house perfecting over the years. That is absurd. James still agreed with Sirius after all these years, his exaggerated pout making it clear his feelings had not changed. Can you imagine one so hard the whole house got it wrong? Remus snickered. I'm sure by then Flitwick would show up to let them in, giving the whole house a tea first, Sirius laughed. I actually never got the bloody thing right, Sirius sighed. Though I insist I should have gotten credit for making up my own answers. Not everyone can appreciate your genius, Padfoot, Remus told him with almost no sarcasm. What? James muttered. It didn't ask about a circle. That's not even an answer, that's just a statement to something else, Sirius pouted in agreement. The point to all riddles, really. Lily agreed cheerfully that she'd gotten it right, choosing not to rub this in aloud. Sounds beautiful, Lily said with a touch of envy the boys had managed to sneak into this one as well, and she'd never gotten the chance. They hadn't even bothered to solve the riddle, but likely just followed some other students in there at some point, which she was now convinced she could have. Harry's breath hitched slightly as he finished that, and the others quivered in excitement for some sort of revelation. To befall Harry, he had seen this before, that some answer was on the horizon. Was it in fact the exact same Weasley tiara of Auntie Muriel's? Could Harry pick this one up and discover its true properties like so many other students had never bothered? The possibilities, they all knew, would astound them in the end. Shite! Lily yelped in surprise as Harry face planted the pages in frustration. HP asterisk. Are you freaking kidding me? This is Rowling's own fault now for being in the last leg of the last book and still not giving one decent Slytherin student. Not one first year grew afraid of their house and tried to make a run for it, and Neville rescued them. I don't care if you inserted a miraculous personality switch of Pansy or a character we'd never heard of was suddenly around, but not one single Slytherin was in there. Bullshit. 8. Chapter 30. The Sacking of Severus Snape. Chapter text. This is not real. This cannot be happening. I can't even wrap my head around Death Eaters teaching those kids, but now they're in the dorm. That's supposed to be a safe place. How did Flitwick? How is anyone allowing all of this? James was still loudly shouting, while Harry was handing the book to Remus without quite as much fuss. He was too busy lost in thought with the same bad feelings, but letting his father vent them, and Remus was waiting patiently while Prongs and Lily came to terms with this newest crisis. Voldemort would now know where Harry was without question, and he was still at a disadvantage in only guessing what the last Horcrux was. Now they had a Death Eater to contend with. It was maddening how the world seemed determined to make this as difficult as possible for their son. Sirius was finally the one who had to swoop in and calm the two. He's got Luna as backup. They'll deal with this and then, I don't know, start searching the castle. That's not the point. Lily snipped. If this had happened in Gryffindor Tower, she cut herself off in horror. Sirius didn't argue that. He'd gladly pull the tongue out of whichever Carrow this was, but Harry finished for him so he didn't have to. I wish I could tell you guys it happened differently, but please, wouldn't you rather find out than keep worrying? The once head boy and girl still had a problem letting this go, but both apologized to Harry and agreed with that, letting Remus keep going. Luna never did strike me as the kind to enjoy dueling, Lily nodded. Doesn't stop her from packing a punch, James said with glee as he pictured it. Tisk, tisk, Harry. What a lack of oversight on your part not going over stealth, Sirius grinned. One of the best descriptions I've ever heard, Remus quietly agreed, fingers painful along the book's binding as he expected any moment one of those kids to take the punishment for what just happened. Harry wouldn't let that happen, but it didn't mean he could entirely stop it. If not, I'll finish the job myself, Sirius said with a vicious grin, though Harry hadn't needed any convincing he meant it. The prodigy of Ravenclaw Tower deserves all the credit for it, James said fervently. Harry was hoping this would cause them to stop for a second, try and figure it out again while laughing at each other, but that feeling would not resurface. Even his mother didn't seem to think twice about it, all attention focused on these Death Eaters and what unspeakable thing they'd do next. Really, he couldn't come up with a better answer than that. No wonder he's a Death Eater. I keep forgetting they've all got no brains. Sirius rolled his eyes. Sirius did try for an awkward sort of laugh at that, saying, Bet you not a single Gryffindor would have. Remus elbowed him and kept going louder, and Sirius agreeably closed his mouth, muttering that was smarter of those little kids anyways. Professor McGonagall. Harry said her name with a grand mixture of feelings, half of which even he couldn't discern. His family just felt relief. Finally, a sensible person was around again. Remus' teeth went on edge as he forced himself to say that, and couldn't even pretend to have it come across anywhere near the disrespect Amicus would have. It wouldn't surprise me at all if McGonagall was the same as Hermione and could have ended up in this house, Lily said fondly. It didn't matter how much Neville had tried to explain this already. Hearing such a thing just so casually being said could never be normalized in their eyes. Remus was already reading with a tight chest, and the casual threats were sure to make him sick any moment. It was admittedly interesting, on some level, for Lily to hear the combined fear he had for his sister and Voldemort all at once. Not enough for her to pay it attention longer than the second it took to realize such a thing was being said. She already hated these two on the same level as Snape for being the reason Hogwarts fell into such a dark place. An entire disappointment, I'm sure, James grumbled. I always knew she loved me. James beamed for his old favorite teacher, never backing down from these pests for a second. He actually had a fun moment visualizing for a second all the hell she would have given them over the year. Umbridge really would have been nothing in comparison. Harry naturally felt the same thing now twice over. He would have hugged his old professor given the chance. Well, if you stayed in one place and she was looking in a circle, she'd hardly not look in the same place twice, Sirius snorted. Do you think she actually knows you're there? James asked. She never knew about the cloak, Remus corrected. Who's to say she doesn't? Lily disagreed. Dumbledore could have told her. Snape and Professor Lupin could have as well. She could have even figured it out for herself as much as James used it. I don't even know how we'd find out, James said with an awkward laugh. If they asked and she didn't, then the gig was up anyways. Remus decided to shelve that problem away for later. He didn't want to be distracted from this right now. Good Godric, what am I hearing? James asked faintly. The absolute worst was all Lily could manage. Only by the grace of McGonagall, for all the worthy teachers in that school, could they believe this was how things would remain. An expression I can't say I've ever seen, Remus shivered, and I can't say I ever want to. Harry watched every one of them twitch in unison, the urge to go for their wand and defend this so ingrained, and only being held back by the barest instinct of the reminder there was no Death Eater in here to transfigure into dung for retribution. Harry crossed his arms and straightened his back, fully preparing for another fight about this. Just because I hate you doing it doesn't mean I can't enjoy it from time to time, James finally surprised him by grudgingly saying. James, Lily snapped. What? I can't say I'd have been much better in the moment. He could only say lackluster. It was a lie. His loathing of the dark arts was so ingrained otherwise, but he wasn't going to even give his son a side-eye, much. I can still be bloody pissed enough. Sirius scowled. I don't see McGonagall approving of the same curse being used on students all year recreationally now as payback. He trailed off by the end, though, as he realized what he was saying. It was a crude, poetic justice. Like prongs, he couldn't bring himself to hate. Remus rubbed at his temple for a few moments before finally saying, I guess at this rate, there's no way he could do anything worse. He was clearly fighting off a smile at the end as well. Thanks, Harry rolled his eyes. Lily still didn't look very happy, but then Harry knew she'd never accepted their form of justice and probably wouldn't ever see these as acceptable. He was grateful Remus decided to keep going before she could remind them of that. You, Sirius spluttered for a moment, looking entirely offended by that reminder. Seeing McGonagall get disrespected was worse than her killing me. Harry flattened his hair for a moment as he tried to come up with some way to explain the difference. It wasn't just the emotion that drove the spell Sirius. I wanted Bellatrix to feel what I was in that moment, but now, well, that Death Eater stood there and spat on everything in my life at once. McGonagall, Hogwarts. I meant for him to never forget that, something I could never have left an impression on in Bellatrix. His life felt twisted beyond recognition as he tried to explain such a dark feeling while using this spell to his godfather. But at the same time, he could hear the plea in his own voice to be understood. Sirius couldn't think of anything to say back to that. He just nodded his acceptance. That's how Harry saw it. A fair question, really, James giggled. But as usual, she cuts straight to the point, Lily grinned. Even she's got to have her limits, Remus said in sympathy. The question is, will that stop Death Eaters and Snatchers from just apparating right into the school? Lily asked with a bone-deep shiver. Seems to, James slowly worked out. The magic embedded in that castle hopefully couldn't be lifted even by whatever taboo Voldemort places. Let's hope, Remus sighed. James felt like a bludger had just crashed into his knees for such a thing being spoken anymore. Didn't McGonagall understand Harry had never been given that option? Even as an 11-year-old boy, the thought had never even crossed his mind. Remus stuttered painfully over that for a second so that it took them a moment to even recognize the spell. Then Lily looked like she swallowed a lemon dipped in poxy droppings for several breaths before finally saying, Guess there are no holds barred anymore. Welcome to the end, James whispered. Lily still shivered at the unnaturalness of the idea. How all of that could have been achieved without taking away the will of the Death Eater to do it. But now Minerva McGonagall had a job to do and no time to do it. She would do whatever it took. The one highlight of all this, Sirius sighed, without even being able to enjoy the moment himself. Was that all it took? Remus asked in exasperation. Invoking Dumbledore's name. Bloody hell, are we sure these two never hooked up? Hardy Harmony. James rolled his eyes. A surprise to many, I'm sure, Sirius grinned. Don't remind me, Lily spat, already imagining him running off tail between his legs back to his master the moment he realized he no longer had control over that school. That's not going to be Filch, is it? Lily whispered one last time to no one before she braced herself for a fight no one could have imagined possible. Right in one Lils, Sirius nodded slowly, eyes not leaving the book for 1 second, as if he could ordain the outcome if he stared hard enough. I'd say he's developed a sixth sense for it by now, but I'd rather blame it on the same slim bit of intelligence the Carrows used in knowing why the mark was pressed, James sneered. Then his expression widened into smugness, which they ignored as no one had really thought otherwise. There was a painful feeling twisting up inside of Remus as he read this. He could have been telling of any casual Saturday night patrol between two teachers if he didn't know better, but sadly he did, and the mounting sense of doom for what was going to happen was making it difficult to even see straight. Remus felt like his insides were being burnt alive after all of that. Lily was fighting back to get a breath herself as she stuttered. Best outcome that could be had, I suppose. I disagree, James sneered. I wish they'd cut him down like the traitor I always knew he was. If anyone deserved such a thing, it would be the proper teachers of the school showing him how it's done. Lily bit her lip to stop a scream. Of agony or anger she wasn't sure anymore. James seemed more than aware by the end how unhinged he sounded and forced his imagination to stop where it was. It did him no good to keep remembering that if Snape hadn't ratted them out to Voldemort to begin with because of that prophecy, then Peter would have never had a reason to betray him. It was a fool's way out, he knew, to try and pin blame on someone else. Why is this a thing now? Sirius burst a feeling he'd long since held in. I don't even get why Voldemort started doing it. That is not cooler than flying on a broom by any means, but clearly it doesn't matter what magic's around and you can do that whenever. But when the bloody hell did Snape take the time? Think of it this way, Padfoot, Remus cut in. Now you can picture him even more easily like a bat. Bloody flying rat, James agreed. Please let them never fix that, James begged. The short break or the snot-shaped hole, Remus asked. Yes, James smirked. I think that's the most terrifying thing I've yet heard, Lily said, losing a few shades of color for it. More than the Horcruxes even, I mean, what could be more powerful than Hogwarts and these teachers defending it? Surely not even Voldemort. James reached around Harry and took her hand. It was all the comfort he could give her, but it was still enough for her to control herself while Remus kept going. One that Harry only wished he had not understood, as it circled him again through his family. So would I actually, Sirius said at once with the greatest of vengeance, let those who deserved it suffer the cruelty of those plants. Lily whistled softly, as she'd only read about those spells in her last year there. Further study into something so complex would take a century to learn. She'd always heard how powerful a wizard he was, but it was still another to hear such evidence. Unless you gave it to Voldemort, he put it on, and gained the wisdom of realizing he should give up now, James sighed. Would he rather sit back and do nothing? Remus demanded. I swear, what good is he to anyone, let alone as head of house? He's saying to think of other options, Lily defended. McGonagall just declared a state of siege without consulting the others. I don't blame him taking that poorly, even if it was my first instinct as well. Damn, Remus finished in a tiny voice. This wasn't a new experience for him, but he'd never had to think of such a thing happening on Hogwarts grounds, with the teachers he'd grown up idolizing involved. This was all so surreal. Lily's breath hitched in her throat as she realized once again Harry had never met a decent person from Slytherin. Whatever came next would define the next generation's life about a house tonight, and it broke her heart as she imagined the green banners being blasted permanently from the school's history. Is he having an aneurysm? This would all be worth it if he dropped there now with a heart attack. Remus scowled for how this man had steadily grown more horrifying every year he'd been there. Oh, those Death Eaters are so dead, Sirius burst out laughing. He could already imagine the mayhem that would ensure his attack on Umbridge was the warm-up. Now that's the most unbelievable thing I've yet heard. James cackled. That about described his whole life there, actually, Sirius nodded. It was almost comical how all five of them felt their mouths hang open for a second at such an idea. Those things used to give Lily the creeps. Harry had never thought much about them past his first few weeks, and the marauders loved to laugh about what all they could do with them. Never to this magnitude had anything like this occurred to them. I do just love that she knows there's a group of renegade students somewhere in this castle, James beamed. We always knew nothing got past her, Sirius nodded. At this rate, if he still reacted to those whispering students, I'd be more worried for his mental health than Voldemort's, Remus snorted. Well, that was convenient, Lily said in surprise. I guess the magic would have recognized Harry as a non-Caro supporter, James offered as reminder. Sirius felt his heart stutter in first surprise, then worry. Mooney tried to play off like he'd said nothing significant at all, but there was no pretending he didn't say his own name with a sense of foreboding. James squeezed his eyes tight shut for a second before forcing them back open lest he freeze over. Of course, Remus was there. All of hell breaking loose, and I'm not even joking, Sirius told him sincerely. Why, thank you, Sirius. I really hadn't picked up on that myself, Remus still told him with all the good nature in the world. Brilliant, Lily managed to say without her voice cracking. She was the only one who could make the attempt. It was a good thing. Now their old home wasn't left to be defended by a bunch of teenagers, but at the same time, there were so many more there now, and the question of who would live only grew. I've just realized, where's Ron and Hermione? Remus asked, anything to divert attention from him. He could see the shadow across James' face, as if already picturing his casket lining up next, and the question burning on Lily's lips as she longed to ask someone who couldn't answer where his child was. You've got me, Harry answered after a delayed moment where he realized the same and got a stinging pain for trying to think where. I swear if they dipped out for a snog, now of all times, Sirius exclaimed, but Harry's stomach was churning too painfully to laugh right now. All alone, Lily said with dread. She'd be damned if she'd suffer the same, while on the flip side she could see Marley's point. There just wasn't much of one anymore for the mother to even pretend Ginny would stay out of this. And the three marauders demanded. I'm actually wondering why she was even with them, Remus chuckled for a moment. Could they not sneak out without her noticing, but her parents didn't, or did they actually go get her? I'd believe either, honestly, James shrugged. She probably woke them up to come with her, Harry reminded. If they all still had their coins, and they went along rather than arguing. If Ginny actually goes home and waits like a good girl, I'll marry Voldemort and Bellatrix myself, Sirius said deadpan. The only one missing is Charlie and Ron. Lily finally said into the awkward silence that followed this. He came back, Sirius finally declared. He couldn't think of anything else to say to this turn of events. He came home, Lily corrected, heart swelling more than it had since Teddy's birth was announced. There was hope again that some miracle would happen and everyone would make it out of this alive and well once more. Finally, someone asked. Lily whooped. Remus slack-jawed reading finally took on a hint of glee himself, which he just as quickly tried to cover. Don't even bother any more, Mooney. Enjoy hearing about your own little marauder junior, James scolded. Remus struggled for a few moments, still trying to fight off the ever-growing urge of this vision being true, before finally giving in for just this one moment. If Percy could come back now of all times and admit to all he'd done, why shouldn't he let himself fantasize during that time to have his own normal family? I'm sure she loves that as much as Ginny would, Sirius said in surprise. She'd never struck him as the sit-around type. Even when Remus' rejection had hit her hardest, she'd still been going about work. I give it 5 more seconds before all those personalities break out, and mashed parsnips are going to be the least of someone's worries, James muttered. Lily cooed so much Harry wouldn't be surprised one bit if she perfectly pictured the infant without the photo just fine. I want to see. James demanded of nothing, bouncing so hard in his seat it was likely to come loose beneath him. Sirius clapped Remus so hard on the shoulder he nearly dropped the book. Hear that, Mooney? You know, I don't know too many babes that get turquoise hair now. He's like Tonks, Remus whispered so quietly you wouldn't even realize he'd spoken if all eyes weren't on him. Then he shouted it, at the top of his lungs, so loud clicks screeched at him from the corner. He looked so deliriously happy, no one could bother to laugh at him for finally seeing what they'd known all along, When he kept going, there could have been no one else in the world but for Remus finally yearning to know more about his son. "How dare he?" James said, for the last time about that Weasley hopefully. "Articulate as always, that one," Sirius nodded. "I'm sure Fred loved that," Sirius snickered, while Harry's smile became rather mechanical. He had the sudden mad desire to rush back up the stairs and seal off the room of requirements so none could leave. He'd find another way to evacuate the students, then Remus kept reading, and Harry forced his imagination to shut off. "I'll be honest, I'm pretty disappointed all of this happened without Harry seeing. I'd love for it to have just dawned on him like a ton of bricks," Lily snorted. She was so jazzed. Finally, everything seemed to be going right, and she refused to let it all crash down again, the reminder of what was causing it. Voldemort had been defeated by love once. The combined power of it emanating from that castle would surely send him running before he even breached the gates. Naive she was not, but the feeling of hope bubbling in her made her confident it would be nothing less. "Oh, the horror!" James burst out, with only the kind of laughter he could manage right before a fight. "What an introduction!" Remus managed a laugh, mind only half on what he was saying, the rest of his attention still trying to skip ahead to see if any more was shared about Teddy. "Credit to her for taking advantage of the situation," Sirius grinned at Harry. "You've really got yourself a good one, Harry." "Well, I think so," Harry smiled. "Oh," the four around Harry said in understanding. "I guess they went off to the chamber without you," Remus concluded, trying to hide his disappointment he was gone for now, and likely wouldn't show up to fawn over his cub any time soon. "Why was that your first thought?" Harry protested louder than he meant as a sharp pain lodged in the base of his skull. "Well, it seemed kind of obvious," James offered in apology as Harry groaned and rubbed at his head for having the feeling of how right they were no matter how early, even now. "Really, Harry?" Sirius snorted with mirth. "Did you think they stepped into the loo at the same time for a quick chat? Or it threw me off." Harry protested still with more force than he meant, but his skull was starting its own tempo of pain now. There was too much going on, too many things to keep track of, and hold his breath it would all still work out somehow. "Boy, am I going to be disappointed when he doesn't get to act out in that," Lily stated with a voice of pure ice. It was all perfect in her mind now. They were going to find that diadem, and Voldemort would flee like he always did the moment he faced such opposition, just like all bullies in the end. HP, 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 HP. The last thing we see Remus say is showing off a picture of his baby. Huge headcanon I won't bring up in fic, but genuinely fascinates me offered by Kisser, directly quoted from a previous conversation we had. I had always wondered why he was such a well, Pratt, when the rest of his family held firmly to their friends and family, no matter what, even though Ron had his moments in fourth year and during the Horcrux hunts. But Ron always supported Harry when his friend's life was actually in danger, and he wasn't being controlled by Tom's Horcrux locket. I realized that the one who would have been most likely been affected by the rat would be Percy, since he was his pet for 10 years. So it made me wonder if perhaps the reason why Percy was so gung-ho about joining the ministry and went so far as to break away from his entire family for a man that had ordered Dementors into a school full of children, which included his own younger siblings at the time, was because of some deeply ingrained compulsion charms on Pettigrew's part. Percy's dream had always been to work for the Ministry of Magic. But what if that dream had been expounded on by Wormtail at a young age in order to have an in the ministry in the future? Remus and Sirius said it themselves. Everyone, including the Death Eaters, were after him, so he had no other choice but to remain as a rat. But if he bided his time until Percy grew up and became Minister of Magic, or someone high enough up the ladder to have the minister's favor, he could have given up his place as a rat with his paltry excuses of Sirius, would have killed him thanks to the ingrained compulsion charm and been allowed his life back. Or, in the occurrence of Voldemort's revival to power, he could have handed over the high-ranked third-born Weasley on a silver platter for his lord, and been spared by the Death Eater's win-win for him, really. This makes a horrific amount of sense to me, seeing as a 5-year-old child wouldn't have had any protection against compulsion charms at so young an age. The Weasleys had no wards against such a thing, and this is further backed by the fact that Percy didn't come out of his funk until after Peter had been killed, kinda like Imperious curse victims. and compulsion charms, and not the imperious curse, would have probably accounted for a lot of his bratness about the ministry when he and his siblings had been raised to believe that love, family, friends, and justice come first. I had always headcanoned long before this that Percy's drive to be a part of the ministry was because he loved and emulated his father, and that he wanted to be high up the echelon enough in order to get his father the funding and manpower that he deserves. With this new headcanon added to the mix, I feel that 5-year-old Percy would have wanted to be a part of the ministry like his hero, Arthur, but Peter added compulsion charms to the mix to make it into an obsession, so that by the end of his Hogwarts years, he had forgotten the original reasoning behind wanting to join the ministry in the first place. It was only after Pettigrew's death that the charms began to fade away, and the previous teachings that his father and Marthet had instilled in him at a young age was brought back to the surface when he saw his family fighting against Voldemort's followers. Now, I'd never pretend that magic solves every character flaw in this series. I'd be a right hypocrite considering all I've said about Ron, Dumbledore, and Snape. But dang, does this just make a ton of sense. I guessed that at that same second as well, and spent the next chapter rolling my eyes at Harry for naught. Where else would they go, dude? 7. Chapter 31. The Battle of Hogwarts. Chapter text favorite chapter of this book. It's a culmination of the entire series being paid off below, and I could never fawn over this masterpiece enough. HP Lily took the book with a steel resolve. What they were reading was so far beyond them, it had never even occurred to be featured in a nightmare. But here it was, a battle at Hogwarts. She read out what happened with the same flat determination and fire she would have had she been present that day to defend what was right. James blinked sluggishly at the description. The picture being painted was unique enough, but the environment he was forced to hear it erased whatever laugh he would have gotten out of it. Is someone going to escort the prefects, though? Remus asked. The room of requirements isn't exactly a known place. A hose elf maybe, or they described it well enough Madame Pomfrey and Filch can figure it out for themselves. It's still open after all with Ginny in it, James said. Always like that kid, Sirius chuckled. Shut up, Sirius. Lily rolled her eyes for his purposeful selective memory. Priorities, James spluttered. They were just told to run for their lives and they want to sneak back for some textbooks. As if you wouldn't for your cloak, that picture of your parents. Lily said softly, and he closed his mouth in solemn agreement. Turncoated, as we all knew, Sirius sneered, while Lily tried and failed to agree with the same loathsome tone. She certainly felt it in her, but the act of putting it into words still tore her apart. After all he'd done, and still he seemed to have no regrets but to return to his master. Then she flushed in both shame and anger, for herself and for them. It seemed everyone but her found the good in this, and no one but her would ever think twice about it, why he'd done it, and what if he hadn't. Lily shivered down into her seat, nearly making the whole couch move with her. She watched her son clap his hands over his ears in remembered horror, and James eye the walls of their home as if to prepare to fight that any second should the same happen again. This monster truly knew how to get under the skin of them all. But all the regular blood, that's fine. I need it to feed my vampire henchman Snape, Sirius sneered, clutching his own wand so tight he was likely to break it in half. Lily's heart was thundering in her chest. In that moment, she only knew the urge to stand in front of his crib once more and plead his life be spared for hers instead, until Sirius cut in with a voice of pure murder. Great. So now we know when to schedule Voldemort's funeral. Details matter. James laughed ardently, throwing an almost casual arm around Harry, emphasized more than anything for him the protective rising feeling all around him. His mother shook out her dark red hair and kept going like she always would. Remus looked on with pride for this, not for being the person to start that. Such honor would more likely go to a Weasley, like Marley, but just for the knowledge of his involvement. In the school as a whole doing the right thing without question. Far kinder than I would have been, Sirius said conversationally. See what it looks like when almost 100 people curse someone at once. Lily ground her teeth together, but forced herself not to shoot the look at Harry who didn't deserve it. She would not believe it. Such a thing was impossible. Cunning did not equate to abdicating everything but yourself. She could not interrogate her son for this, but could never believe that not one Slytherin would stay and help this school in some way. The five present, and accounted for Gryffindors, beamed for this display of bravery. It was their most proudly displayed trait for a reason, after all, in their very blood not to back down from a fight. Even James nearly sent himself to tears for thinking it, as he was positive he was the only one, but even Peter had known how to fight back. I'm not surprised one bit those brothers want to stay, Remus grinned. I am a bit shocked they're there, James said. How did Neville manage to spread the message so far to Muggle-borns in deep hiding? Details I doubt we get, Harry admitted. He had no recollection of stopping someone to ask about it. Wasn't Peakes, that kid from your Quidditch team, the beater? Sirius asked. Harry agreed. He was only a fourth year, but I couldn't help admiring him for a second as he told McGonagall he was staying anyways. He looked ready to go get his bat and show her why on any Death Eater he was pointed at. I'm sure McGonagall loved that, Lily smiled. I love our house, James grinned. I'm still pretty aghast the idea hasn't even crossed your mind, Remus told him. You lot are way too sure of yourselves, you're right. Harry could only grumble, as he had a feeling they were. You know, I'm guessing the majority of the students left don't know what that is, Sirius pointed out. Not the point. They were lumped together with the teachers, so at this point the 17-year-olds would just see them as more authority against Voldemort, Remus shrugged. Lily tried to act like there wasn't a pit in her stomach for getting to know where Remus would be at. There was no safe place to be, but she couldn't pretend she didn't instead wish him up in the turrets instead of the battlefield. There was no sense in checking the boys. No matter how much she cared for him as her friend, her husband and serious worry would still be greater. Couldn't have asked for better. James Mark wiped a tear from his eye. Godric himself would be proud. Lily smiled in agreement. Why on earth would a man who valued bravery put in secret tunnels? Sirius challenged. What better way to win a battle than to know all the entrances and exits better than anyone, including the ones you made up yourself? Bravery doesn't always mean he had to charge in head first, Lily sniffed. Sirius didn't argue the point for now. He rather liked the idea his own house founder had added in something that Sirius loved most about the castle. Sirius wanted to laugh at Harry for that, but he couldn't even blame him. If his friends had spontaneously vanished like that, he'd be no better. I've noticed that about you a lot, Remus agreed. No matter how much you insist you need to be alone, you always work best with them around you. Harry flushed a bit but didn't bother to deny it. Or, we never found the chamber, so you can't. James couldn't help but laugh while Harry ground his teeth. But then, why put him there instead of where he actually placed the Horcrux? Lily countered. Were you lot right? Was it just that statue? It is an odd decision in that way, Remus agreed. It's as if he actually guessed what Dumbledore would think it was without any proof, and Harry was, I don't know, trying to prove this theory, but then Voldemort just proved it for him. That still doesn't explain where it actually is. Surely Voldemort would have told that Caro to move the diadem, even if he didn't tell her what it was, James sighed. Not just wait around for Harry. That's all you've been asking about. You never asked anyone else if there could be another option besides the diadem, Sirius pointed out. I'm sure the Ravenclaws would have mentioned it alongside the diadem, Remus shrugged. The hat? James suddenly burst with excitement. The Hogwarts sorting hat, maybe it knows. And it never told anyone. Harry challenged even as his eyes sparkled with interest, for no reason to him, as that hadn't at all been where his mind was heading, but he still had a feeling he should check on that. Nobody ever asked. James insisted to his idea while Harry just smiled mysteriously, thinking they'd like his option even more if it worked. Wait, what did we miss? Remus asked, still stuck on Prong's idea, and if it would work. To hope I'm right, Harry said innocently. The excitement coming off of him in waves instantly had the desired effect. Well, that's not a bloody Hogwarts secret anymore, Sirius pouted, even if it was the smallest of concerns right now. I really hope someone stuns him and uses him as a speed bump at the front gates. Lily spat in disgust for such a display. That's not a bad idea, Harry, Remus praised. Though I don't know why you think Nick would tell you, or any ghost for that matter. Surely someone would have asked them. It wasn't Nick I was after, Harry corrected, and no one ever asked Myrtle how she died. It was worth a shot. Not denying that, he nodded, all of them looking pleasantly surprised and very intrigued at Harry's leap of logic. They'd never been able to get her to talk at all, and were equally as worried this was going to burn away more time as they were curious to see Harry's attempt. "That's fair, and a little ironic," Sirius said with a sour grin. "He's learned to dread students coming to him with certain questions. Now he's wanting you to ask him specifically. If she even speaks to you, it'll be a miracle." Remus couldn't help but remind Harry. "We tried to get her to tell us for ages how she died with every other ghost." Harry had no reason to believe he could pull off anything the Marauders had once tried, but that didn't at all deter him from his hope. "A typical response," Sirius snorted. "You're already off to a better start than most," Remus said. "Why would she reference Hufflepuffs at a time like this?" Sirius snickered. "Why would they ask her at all?" Lily said. "I wouldn't have ever asked Nick where to find the sword of Gryffindor." "She's Ravenclaw's daughter," James told her. "Helena, but that's the most anyone's gotten out of her, really, and we only heard that from Flitwick. It's a good bet she's as bitter as her mother about it getting lost and doesn't like to talk about it." "I always thought she died trying to find it and doesn't like to admit to it," Remus explained their old theory. "No, you said you weren't worried about homework right now," James said with a slight chuckle. "That's still two different things, Harry. Honestly, if it wasn't a Horcrux, that wouldn't even be a bad idea." Harry scowled slightly for the lot of them so firmly off track while he was trying to have a revelating moment. "In a much politer way," Lily couldn't help but say without any true scolding, while Harry resisted rolling his eyes as disappointment began to cloud him. Five jaws could have collectively hit the ground at once if that were possible. As it was, their faces couldn't have shown any more surprise for this spontaneous exposition if Ron had shown up at that moment to declare himself Dumbledore's past self. Lily had to check to make sure none of the boys had passed out before she could keep going. "That's smart," Sirius struggled to say, still flabbergasted he was hearing this at all. "Did someone slip you Felix Felicis?" James shouted in his son's ear. "How did you manage this?" He clearly wasn't as keen on letting it go. Harry didn't think he'd like the answer, one that he already had a feeling about with this being shared for another student. It was the only way he could think of as he listened intently. None of them could have pretended to link such a thing until it was spelled out for them. The Marauders were especially growing more in awe and dumbfounded by the second. The two ghosts they'd never been able to suss out the deaths of were connected. Sure, why not? And next Harry would find out that McGonagall was a Death Eater all along. But Sirius stammered a protest. It was hardly the most surprising thing he'd learned in this fortnight. It probably wouldn't even make his top 10 list, but it was still up there, certainly beating out how the twins discovered their map. "Albania," Remus repeated, a place that had sat in the back of his mind for days as a giant question mark. Why there? What had made Voldemort flee there? And what would it take to make him stay? Now, he finally realized where he'd gotten the idea. "She wasn't the first or the last to fall for it," Lily whispered the sad reminder. "Slughorn, all the teachers at that school, he could have been a remarkable person if he were even a person at all underneath the murderous monster." James couldn't help a snort of surprise. That hadn't been what was on his mind, but Harry wasn't wrong. "Damn him!" Sirius spat, sick of the never-ending damage he continued to cause that resonated through every part of their life. "At least you have half the battle," Lily said. "That's all I ever seem to have," Harry sighed. "I really can't believe the Chamber of Secrets hasn't occurred to you once during this," Sirius couldn't help but say again. "Especially after you thought something like that. Does it make you feel better to keep pointing it out?" Harry gripped. "Slightly, yes," he smirked. "Hagrid's back." Sirius bellowed loud enough he could have heard at Hogwarts. "I missed him," James agreed, if anything just for the way he returned. "And now I feel I have no choice but to like Grop." Sirius laughed in surprise. "I'll shove you through a window all you like, Padfoot," Remus snorted. Harry watched the four of them starting to look uneasy now. Their confidence was waning the longer this went on, and if they were wrong, then it would be damn near as impossible to find them as it would the diadem at this rate, and Harry couldn't concentrate on one until the other was found. An endless cycle of worry. Lily's voice shook with unease as faces kept flashing through her mind. Remus would be down there, a new father whom she feared was destined to share the fate of his once friend. Arthur and Marley, another set of parents Harry had no right to lose again. Oliver and his exasperating but clever use of Quidditch strategies. Luna, Dean, Seamus, Neville. The list went on of people she'd be heartbroken to hear of losing their life below. Asterisk, I wouldn't want that thing anywhere near me right now. It's like having a target on your head, Remus feebly joked. Lily just looked bemused for a few seconds at her son's train of thought at a time like this, before she glanced up at him and saw his popping eyes and the flash of understanding light him with a memory returning properly. She was tempted to smack herself over the head with the book in the same second. How many times has that happened? Remus asked far too calmly in her opinion. At this point, I'm more surprised you didn't casually see the ring in Borgin and Burke's before. Are you kidding me? Sirius broke through half shouting again for a completely different reason. Voldemort actually thought that place was discovered by no one but him. It's literally a place of junk students' store. He actually does know others know of it, James agreed. He knew of Malfoy's plan to sneak Death Eaters into the school using that exact room. I've got nothing, Lily groaned. I'm so exhausted trying to keep up with his inhumanity, let alone his insanity. The bright side is now we do know, and this will probably be the easiest one to get. Right you are. Good point, Lily Flower, James agreed, still looking uneasy for this lapse in Voldemort's judgment. It seemed more likely Harry had guessed wrong to him. It just made no sense. Actually, he accidentally used it once as a bathroom, Sirius snorted. Speaking of, yes, Sirius, I know. Bathrooms are important this time around. Are you asking permission to go or something? Harry shot back. Well, now that you mention it, I probably should before I actually piss myself in shock. Sirius only half-heartedly joked back. The Death Eaters or the Mandrakes, Remus said. Yes, Sirius smirked. Lily had been in plenty of fights and battles during school and for the Order. Never the two combined, not once having to both worry about what students were seeing and who she was aiming her next curse at. This was a nightmare, a war. Damn it, Hagrid, James bellowed, but he couldn't be as resentful and mad as he thought he should be. Harry had long since proven capable of taking care of himself. The dog needed the protection more. It still didn't mean he liked his son being on his own again at a time like this. Where's George? Sirius interrupted, more out of surprise than true concern. Like anyone could sneak up on the twins in that place any more than the marauders. Likely split off with another group to cover more ground, James pointed out. Why wouldn't Lee be doing the same, though? He'd know those just as well, Remus argued. Back up. Maybe he's got Angelina with him, Lily said with a bit of a laugh. Fred was dating her, not George, James reminded. Are you lot done? Harry said a bit impatiently. Thinking about the twins, about everyone running around that castle was causing him to grow more worried by the second. Even those he didn't recognize, he worried were going to suffer for what he was doing. Lovely weather. That's what we're going with, Remus snickered. Or, quick snack before she realizes there's other corpses to feed off of, Sirius said, his own face looking rather grossed out by what he'd said. You're not allowed to commentate anymore, Lily grumbled, knowing full well she couldn't stop him. He sort of asked for it when he sent Ariana to fetch Neville, Remus said without remorse. The thought didn't even cross my mind, James admitted. The idea of using kids as hostages, even Death Eater kids like Malfoy, was abhorrent to consider for a second. It's what the enemy had tried to do to Luna, to all the kids in that castle all year, and no one would ever stoop so low in return. Has anyone ever mentioned what House Aberforth was in? Sirius asked. I think you could make a case right there he was in Slytherin. He didn't say it like it was a bad thing, just a statement of fact, in the same way he'd seen the whole house leaving the hall as an advantage onto themselves, rather than a whole, like the original cunning Slytherin cutting his losses with a school. Of that we can agree on. Lily paused for a moment to reach out and squeeze Harry's hand, watching him flinch at his own thoughts. It's a fair reaction. Sirius nodded along for Harry's benefit. Those two had been starting to scare him. Something else had been going on. Oh, good point, Remus nodded. I hadn't thought, without Fawkes around, how they get back up that tunnel. If only they'd brought a Slytherin student, they might have just had stairs, Lily giggled. What? James asked her. Well, I just thought, maybe it only turns into a tunnel just like the dorms recognize if you're a boy or girl and not belonging in that house. You make a good point, James beamed at her. They really had to carry those, Remus asked uneasily. It would have been far safer to stuff them in her bag. One nick. Don't, James snapped, and Remus at once closed his mouth in agreement that wasn't something to even be considered. Actually, I hadn't thought about that, Sirius frowned. I just kept picturing them standing at the entrance waiting for you to figure out where they were. Lily shushed him so she could find out. Had they brought a snake along and gotten it to hiss at the door? Clearly not, as Harry didn't hear the word open. Remus muttered. The door let them in out of pity. Maybe the ancient power of Slytherin wants them to win as well. Lily offered just a bit snidely, as they had no idea why the door would accept it, and Harry didn't hear it now. She can fawn over her boyfriend later. James snickered for his own wit as he eyed his wife. Stop thinking about yourself and get your animals right, Prongs, Sirius sniffed. It's no surprise to me. She oughta fell in love with him after all he's done. I hate you both, Lily tried to say with a straight face, while Harry actually started giggling during all of this. The adrenaline from his past was still echoing through him now, but so long as he kept watching them, he could keep the fear that had come along with it at bay. Oh, Voldemort threatened my life again, had a chat with a ghost who never talks to anyone, just discovered where the lost Ravenclaw item has been after all these years, because I accidentally grabbed it once. Hogwarts is under siege, the usual, Remus sighed. That is a bloody terrifying ladies' club right there, Sirius declared. What's Tonks doing there? Remus yelled over him loud enough Sirius ducked on instinct. Moony didn't even notice, his imagination kicking into overdrive at once of renegade death, eaters out after known order members' houses. Breathe, Moony, James gently cajoled. We were saying earlier how Tonks was no more likely to stay out of this fight than Ginny. She's not hurt. Harry would have said so neither's Teddy. Remus flushed for a moment, feeling sheepish for his exclamation, but James smiled with genuine understanding. He was the only one who could. A theory I never really thought was proven, Lily disagreed. Now doesn't seem the time to test it, Harry said. Smart, they all approved. Lily tried to look relieved for this turn of events. Now Remus had someone to watch his back, as good as if his friends were still there for him. But if his reaction seeing her out there were anything like it had been to in here, it could be a hindrance, and a fatal one at that. James was trying, and failing, not to think the same. There was a reason he and Lily never went on the same order mission together. Harry tried to laugh for the display, but it sounded painful. He'd see Tonks and Remus again. I don't think that's happening, Harry, Sirius told him. I'm more surprised than anything she didn't slip out the moment her parents left, Remus snorted. I mean, he's not wrong, but I do love Ron gave not one single shout after his sister himself. James tried to say with a still joking tone, but it was getting harder the longer this went on. Confidence, Harry tried to say, willing himself to instill that in everyone. I do have to say that quite a bit, Sirius smirked at his friends, while Harry still managed to laugh at that stupid joke. I'm sure that was Ron's entire motivation, Sirius burst out laughing, while Lily continued giggling herself for a few moments before she could keep going. Really, Harry, when is the moment? James asked while looking at his wife. Yeah, I'm sure Ron was thinking the same last year when you started snogging Ginny, but he held it in, Sirius snickered. A very accurate description, James beamed. How that doesn't send everyone running away screaming I'll never know, Remus said honestly. Harry shivered with unease, his innards twisting painfully. That had been the bloke who'd hurt Hermione so bad, he'd better be, Lily told him with such ferocity. Remus knew if he wasn't he'd be paying for it in here. I do wonder at that girl, and how she hasn't hexed you for sounding like her mother, Sirius snorted. The amount of people who keep telling her to stay safe during this deserve to get hit by Grop, and that gargoyle statue for how ludicrous it is. Harry didn't respond, lost in the memories of flashing colors and faces. That still makes no sense, James protested, but didn't keep harping on it. Are you kidding me? Lily thundered the ridiculousness of their timing. How? Why would they go there right now? Did Voldemort send them there to get it? It's a fair possibility, James agreed with a suffering sigh. As if they should have guessed this already, nothing in Harry's life ever happened easily. What happened to that kid who was actually trying to help you in his own home for a split second? Remus tried to protest, but he just shook his head miserably at the end. The three Malfoys were lucky Voldemort didn't kill them for Harry getting away once more. If Malfoy ever had any doubts about his loyalties, they'd likely shifted right back after such a disastrous outcome. I'd almost forgotten that, Sirius admitted. I hadn't, Harry said, gripping his own tighter now. I don't know. I could get a chuckle out of Malfoy's parents being so useless. Now neither of them were even deemed worthy for this fight. James shrugged. I am admittedly disappointed I no longer get to picture Revenge of the Toadstool book if Arthur and Lucius had met each other in the library. But I guess this is more important, Sirius snickered. I'm sure that's the maximum he's ever understood of anything, Remus sneered, well remembering their first introduction right now, still managing to look back on it fondly despite all they'd learned. The fact that he can't pronounce it leads me to think he was just standing with his face against the wall, and you were too distracted to notice, Lily scoffed. A nice bit of jewelry you'll have cracked over your head in a few moments, James promised. If only squashing it under a pile of books were so easy, Remus sighed. Hermione could have crushed them all in moments. Ha ha, irony, James Mark applauded. Whoa, Sirius said with enough intensity to stop Buckbeak in midair. Did he just? Damn, Harry has been gone a while, James agreed. Lily flinched at that curse still casually being tossed around, then reminded herself what Neville had said. It was likely the only spells these idiots had ever learned to master, and that was just as disgusting as anything. They all made a noise of great frustration. It really could never be easy. Lily nearly startled out of her seat at that one. Such wanton ferocity, like a child waving a gun around. These weren't kids anymore, she had to keep reminding herself. They'd listened, practically watched the lot of them age right along with Harry, and these were the end results. James watched Lily flinch again and tried to offer something else to chew on. You know, it never occurred to me, but do you think shooting that spell at a Horcrux would kill it? His mind on the stray spell possibly hitting the diadem and solving their problem. I'm glad no one thought to try, was her icy reply, eyes only for the words now that was Ron and Hermione's salvation. Harry shouted so loud they thought his seat had caught on fire for a second. Then they realized that's exactly what he might have been thinking as he'd drawn his wand, and there was no longer a fire crackling in the logs. They were dripping wet along with most of the mantle in his panic. The room's warmth didn't quite vanish with it. It remained as bright and cheerful as ever to anyone taking a first look. Yet Lily's mouth was dry as a desert now as she croaked out the mess her son was now in. What's that? Sirius felt like a small child demanding such a thing, but he could already feel the orange flickering heat surrounding him on all sides of a dragon's breath coming to life. It was horrifying to think this was a real spell, even playing out on Harry's face. There was no misunderstanding what was happening. Lily didn't answer, because she didn't know. She could think of a few variations, flames that lived forever, fire one could control, but this seemed like more. Lily was as close to hyperventilating as Sirius now. This didn't even feel like a spell. No countercurse could exist for such a thing. This was nature at its most brutal being unleashed on her son. James could finally breathe again, which he swore he hadn't done since Harry had doused the fireplace in his panic. He stopped checking Harry for any burns and just closed his eyes in thanks, for the youngest Seeker in a century to always have a way out. Lily's voice shook with loss as well. 3 boys she'd sneered at on multiple occasions, but she couldn't imagine throwing anyone to die in this, not even Snape. That's fair, Remus whispered faintly, because I'm sure that's helping. James shouted in Harry's ear. Lily said something that was appropriate for the occasion, even if she'd blush later for saying it, as she sped through words all the faster, as if the pages were burning alive in her hands. My boy, the Quidditch captain and youngest Seeker in a century. Lily cheered, suddenly bouncing in her seat like he'd won the next Quidditch Cup. Harry laughed in surprise, while the marauders looked ready to smother them both in a dog pile worth of hugs. They were all so mad with happiness. Even in her jubilation of her son's safety, her pride in his capability to do anything on a broom, the brutality of what was going on around came crashing back so hard, and she still couldn't say what Ron had with anything close to harshness in her voice. The first confirmed casualty of the night, and still she felt for that stupid kid who'd brought it on himself. Did you really think that was going to happen? Sirius snorted. I'd have still felt better if she'd been where I thought she was. Harry said so harshly Sirius flinched. His victory of still having the Horcrux on him was short-lived. Harry meant to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. His heart was pounding in his chest like a live wire inside him. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. I don't see why not, Remus said in surprise. Perhaps just that room will be empty now, or it shouldn't ever be opened again lest that fire still somehow get out, but the rest of its capabilities. Asterisk Harry quelled him with a look. Lily almost didn't keep going for a moment. He was demanding such silence from them all as he concentrated on her every word. Are you kidding me? James wasn't exactly ignoring Harry, but his indignation overruled letting his son dwell on whatever disaster was going to happen next. Hermione's known about this shite the whole time. She could have, I don't know, set that curse off in her bag and got another one. They travelled around with that thing for months while it destroyed the fact that she kept this to herself without even discussing. Dad, Harry pleaded, his head in his hands now. His breathing was becoming erratic. He looked like he was going to sprint off to somewhere he could not be any second. Breathing all over the place, pain from his past slamming into him full force, James forced himself to close his mouth and wrap an arm around Harry's shoulders, his heart picking up the same tempo with worry now. They all knew what Harry reacting like this meant. Something else big was about to happen. Can't imagine what you're panicking over Death Eaters for, Harry. Sirius forced a laugh that sounded like it was coming from a long tunnel to Harry's ears. He couldn't bring himself to acknowledge any of them now, eyes tight shut as it all played through his head now in slow motion. The others could only exchange broken looks. George, Ron, and Arthur had once been injured, and Harry's reaction had been similar. He cared so deeply for everyone in that hallway that it seemed impossible he'd really lose them. It would hurt, it felt cruel, but that's all they could think of now. An injury, but not a mortal one. James took a moment to let out a breathy whistle. He didn't know why he was surprised or impressed. It's not as if Percy had ever made it a secret he was plenty good at magic. Sirius laughed like he thought he was supposed to. Of course Percy was joking. He could go back to the ministry tomorrow, and it would finally be right again. Harry shook in his dad's arms, the noise around him unbearable. Understanding settled over them all like a thick veil. Harry's breath stopped, and none of them knew if it was going to start again. HP again. JK's own fault for not leaving. I don't care. A dozen students behind. Anything. Personal headcanon. 20 or so of them snuck off from those that either made a run for it or joined Voldemort, came back, and helped to pick off Death Eaters one by one without ever discussing it with each other. Students that were never named or acknowledged in series, but still cared like every other house enough to fight back in their own way. I really dislike people calling Peter dumb, stupid, and useless. He fought Sirius, and won. With an underhanded attack, mind you, but a powerful enough one to blow up a street. He outsmarted Remus and Sirius by slipping away the second they were distracted. He killed Cedric and disarmed Harry before either of them could even think to do otherwise. Brave, no, but a good fighter, hells yeah. My idea that you wind up in Gryffindor if you ask for a house still stands with him, because I think Peter asked to be in Ravenclaw or Slytherin. He wanted to be cunning and smart, and figured out all the wrong ways to do that by backstabbing in the end. A terrible decision I believe he regretted. He deserved to be in Gryffindor as much as anyone. That's actually my mistake. I assumed back when I first read this Oliver had arrived with Harry's old Quidditch team until later corrected, so it's just a wrong assumption rather than a mess up. Does anyone else imagine an older student making a joke about a door to hell appearing, this one popping up and them opening it, only to just shout nope and slam it back shut? Because I do, and I laugh. A lot. 6. Chapter 32. The Elder Wand. Chapter text. Oh my God, this is the last chapter that James reads. HP. Death itself seemed to hover in the air around them. He kept breathing it in and exhaling less every second. Soon there would be nothing left for him but bodies on all sides. His mind was spinning out of his control, seizing and pitching him into every moment from his past. From his first train ride to the most important day of his life at this school, always there, never wavering in how they viewed life until the very last moment. How was Harry expected to move on from this again and again? A swath of red hair engulfed him, the wrong color frozen in his memories. He clung to his mother as the shaking slowed, and everything else ebbed back in. The other colors, the people around him. Through him, they'd learned so much, found kids to care about they never would have thought twice of. But he could not bask in this miserable company. There was more to this, there always was. It should have been impossible to go on, but Harry was right. James saw it instantly in the way his son straightened his shoulders and looked around for where the book had gone. For Fred, for everyone in that castle who deserved to have their story told no matter the end, and especially for Harry, James took the book to keep going. James didn't stop a few tears blurring his vision for a moment. The words were foreign on his tongue. Not that he didn't know death, but this kind of loss was both a strange abstract he couldn't grasp for never having actually met Fred Weasley, and a grief he shared with Harry nevertheless for knowing and losing such a person, who was stupid enough to go that far into the forest, and Sirius' voice already sounded hollow and forced, so he stopped anyways when he realized he just didn't care. Of everything going on, he had no will to sit around laughing at whatever buffoon carelessly caused this. He had too much hatred for whomever it was that caused the explosion to deal with. Vindication Ron really needed after all these, Remus, words, failed painfully as he vividly remembered the first time Ron's fear of spiders had been mentioned, when Fred turned his teddy bear into one. Helga Hufflepuff would be disgusted, Lily thought in a desperate plea to bring back that air of normal laughter that flit around them all. The woman who had historically cared so much for the school grounds and started such a project would be rolling in her grave to hear what had come of it. Lily didn't know how James was doing it. She didn't think she could have any more. Broken, another family beyond repair would never be whole again because of this night. Harry an unwilling witness once more. No, no. Someone stop him. He's going to get himself killed. Sirius whispered in a panic. He now knew all too well the feeling of needing revenge for a brother, and one he'd never even been close to. Amplify that for what Percy was going through. Woman's got to have some kind of Herculean strength to have been doing it for even a second, James said, with cold, flat fury in every syllable. If Bellatrix had been in his range right now, no force would have stopped him, and she hadn't even technically killed Sirius. Yet, Harry was brushing tears from his eyes still as he saw what Hermione was doing after all these years. She'd accepted he needed to use every means in his disposal, a step she'd never have considered before. He's not even fighting, Sirius demanded with all the fury he possessed. I can't even he started this ruddy fight, and he can't even be bothered to. They all felt their outrage at this display. James couldn't have agreed more. His voice shook with his anger, but still he curbed Sirius and kept going, not just because Harry needed him to finish, but they all did. It was hardly much of a description at all, but James recognized it. All three marauders did. Voldemort was in their shrieking shack, a sacred place to four lost friends. How would he even know of such a thing? The secret entrance leading to it hadn't even been conceived until after his time. Another betrayal. No, James fought against that idea. There must be some other way Voldemort chose this location. If Wormtail hadn't told him of the secret entrances last year to help him sneak into the castle, why would he at any later time? Harry did not understand the struggle he saw in his father, but he knew he wanted to help. He had to do something rather than sitting here, the need for vengeance burning away everything else he knew. He reached out to take the book, but James jerked it away without looking up. He didn't want anyone to know the argument swimming through his head until he had an irrefutable side. This idiot's arrogance really is his downfall, Remus sneered at how he thought he knew everything and so clearly understood none of it. Harry only got his hands on 3 of them intentionally, and one wasn't even on purpose. Sirius rolled his eyes. Stupidity pretty much killed the others. James felt a whirlwind of emotions tear through him as he managed all of that. He had no fondness for Lucius Malfoy, but for that second he could understand. As if Voldemort wouldn't have the exact same problem of every person in that castle, showing him just how to piss off, Sirius snapped. He'd get no farther. I'm all for the idea, though. I can't believe he's just hiding out rather than doing just that. He's always been rather good at letting others do his dirty work, Remus scowled. Harry hated how well Voldemort seemed to understand him, in the same ways Harry did in return. Only parts the hows, but never the wise Lily had thought her hatred for him had peaked long before now, and she still kept finding new highs. Deserting that school, and then likely in the thick of that fight. Murdering students he'd taught, stabbing anyone in the back on his way. Whatever she'd once valued in his clever friendship with her had died, and now just kept being resurrected to stab her repeatedly. What else could there be? Sirius demanded. Does he want to go over a few more lessons on flying like a prick because you aren't capable of using a broom? Is there a new curse available where you just see their ugly faces? It's not possible they've found a new way to murder someone. They've covered all their bases on that. Remus gave Sirius a sympathetic pat on the shoulder, knowing he could go on for hours, but kindly reminding him to hold it in for just a bit longer so they could get through this. James' mind hovered over that thoughtfully for a moment. The others were still muttering their confusion what Voldemort was up to, but he more than them had been thinking about this wand all day and the implications of how to get it. A flaw that none could have foreseen in Voldemort attaining it. He tried to dismiss it as being paranoid, that so much death piling around him was causing this train of thought, and kept going. It's nice we can always agree on something, Remus nodded. That had been the most insulting thing they'd heard all day, and that was really saying something. And damn him for being right, Sirius huffed. Then again, that's only the second intelligent thing I've ever heard him do, so he doesn't have an excellent track record compared to the infinite number of other stupid things he's done. Harry just smiled at the lot of them, not one of whom had questioned this or even told him to do otherwise. It was nice to learn more every hour just how alike he is to his first family. Yeah, because that's going to happen. James snorted. I'll believe you three aren't going together when I kiss Sirius, Remus agreed. Don't make bets you can't win, Moony, Sirius tried to tell him in a sing-song voice, but there was no force. He no more believed that than anyone. Ron and Hermione really never can go without arguing, even over things long since hashed out. Lily managed the first genuine giggle, even as what they were hearing still weighed heavily around her. Harry heard and was thankful. He needed something else to hear, though he still couldn't believe how it could get worse. And Hermione saves the day once more. James declared with the grandest gesture as if introducing the Queen. Honestly, Ron literally wouldn't have made it down the stairs without her, Sirius snorted. Well, that's going to feature in my nightmares now, Lily promised, as if she didn't have enough images crowding already. That my lily flower will be my new goal in life to recreate under other circumstances, so I'm very sorry for you, James told her sincerely. I've never been more happy to have Peeves in our life, Remus smiled. Well, we know who the captain obvious of that group is, Sirius muttered. Well, if there was any suspension about who, it's gone now, James rolled his eyes at him. I'm sure Dean and Parvati are more worried about wondering where their own friends are than why Harry's running around invisible, Lily shrugged. I'd be just a bit annoyed, Sirius disagreed. They're in there fighting on Harry's behalf against Voldemort. I'd be pretty miffed he seems to be sneaking about rather than helping. Good thing you do know, then. Remus frowned at him, rather than letting his mind flicker to when Harry would see him next, and it likely wouldn't be in much kinder circumstances. Little two-faced bastard. I can't believe Lucius is pleading to save this ferret, Sirius grumbled. Ron will always be there to say the most appropriate things, Sirius beamed, rather than annoying Prongs right now, which threw him off more than anything. It took James several moments longer than if Sirius had just pointed out he'd said the same as Ron to keep going. James tried his best to ignore the little flutter his heart gave at the mention of Kingsley and how Remus had been last mentioned out on the grounds with him. Surely Harry was going to spot him any moment too, and already knew he was going to feel even more sick than he did already at the slightest scratch to Moony. Lovely, Lily managed, looking half amused and half sick at the thought of all this carnage. Even James' imagination was starting to struggle keeping up with all this rapid-fire mayhem, but that one would always stick out to him for several reasons, the main one being he hoped that girl and every other kid who had suffered got retribution tonight. Hopefully ever again, Remus said without remorse, his mind on Teddy, every child that would finally be saved from this monster, a long overdue fear being buried along with Greyback. I take back everything I said about her, Sirius whispered. The prophecies that had done more harm than good, things she never had control over, she made up for in this perfect moment. Damn, is that what it takes for world peace? Man-eating spiders? James asked. Let's not test that theory, Harry shook his head. That moron, Lily shrieked in fright. He's going to get himself killed for those things. Harry didn't hear her, his vision went askew, and he could see nothing at all but that entrance hall. No face stood out but the one he couldn't see now. Hagrid, he couldn't lose him too. There was a time James would have laughed off anything conceivably happening to Hagrid, that this whole part of Harry's life was a fevered nightmare. But he couldn't pretend that now. No one was safe, and his son may have been left truly alone before this night was over. There's Ron's chess mind, thinking 2 steps ahead. Lily feebly approved, while Harry didn't even seem to be listening, as if a giant hadn't just stepped in his way. Not that Hermione could have pulled it off anyways, no matter how powerful she is. Remus muttered. Harry's heart leaped for just a moment, hoped that Grop would come to Hagrid's rescue like Harry was being impeded from doing. Then it was gone as fast as it had arrived, and he was sinking into a frenzied haze of pain and more bright colors of flashing spells he had no hope to untangle in the mess of his mind. James could have been set on fire, and it would not have hurt as bad as this. Those creatures had plagued the worst years of Sirius life, tormented his son, and now were stopping him from going after Harry's first friend. A real father figure James would give his grace to as quick as his godfather. If any species needed to be eradicated, it was this one. Sirius made a maddening sort of noise that could have been a laugh under any other circumstances. They finally got to hear what Ron's patronus was. It was a dog of all things, and the moment was instantly ruined. Story of Harry's life. Harry had his hand pressed to his heart now, half convinced it would sink through to his soul beneath and grasp it protectively. The mirage emotion in him now could never last around them, but it didn't hide it from his mind. Yes, James whooped, punching the air like another quaffle had been scored. Can we assume those were listed in the same order? Remus asked, eyes alight with interest. That would mean Luna's is a hare, Ernie's a boar, and Seamus a fox. Fascinating, really. That Seamus was right, and it was indeed something hairy, Sirius finished, while Harry managed a small laugh for his godfather still. James wished he could throw the book aside and keep Harry safe at his side forever. Lily was rubbing his back and trying to keep him aware of the here and now rather than letting him get lost in his memories. As many times as they'd been denied involvement in his life, at least he'd always have this sacred animal to remind him he was never alone, as well as these friends. There are some things that don't need to be told, Harry, Sirius told him, gaining a few shades of white in his face. Hark, look who's talking. Harry only half managed to laugh at him, rather than letting his feet take over and sprint him from the room. James tried to do the same, and it wasn't too hard. He'd had plenty of practice compartmentalizing over the past fortnight, prioritizing what Harry needed since before he was born, really, but it was starting to worry him how little was left. He wouldn't have much time until he had to confront all of this later. We got through it just fine without a cat, James whispered to himself, wincing once again at the painful memory erupting to mind. It still hurt just as bad as every other time he dared mention such a thing, but for once he forced himself not to shy away from that pain and feel it in full, breathing through it for a moment before moving on. Callbacks. The one time on Earth I desperately love Hermione's I told you so's, Sirius said with only slight derangement. Be glad it doesn't last long. I was having quite a bit of fun imagining it grabbing up Death Eaters and flinging them around, Remus muttered. I can't believe I managed to keep loving Ron more every moment, James told him while Harry smiled, though the expression was growing more strained by the moment as he kept wondering more every second what exactly he'd left them in. Sirius managed to walk through it just fine, Lily recalled in surprise, floating along Snape while he was at it. It only expands to fit the need. They didn't need it to be bigger, Remus shrugged as he reminded. After all he's been through. Sirius said with a nervous laugh. I figured he'd monologue another year before he bothered with such a thing. James couldn't even look at him as he stayed close to Harry's side, well aware how bad this was going to turn any second. Who on earth put that there? Remus protested on instinct, someone messing with a place he'd hated as much as he'd needed in his youth. Voldemort. He'd then have known when Harry got there because he'd have to move it, Lily said. He could have put any number of things up along the tunnel, though, for the same purpose, James disagreed. There's no other way into the shack, though, Sirius scowled and tapped his foot impatiently for not coming up with an answer to this. When you lot used it, Lily uneasily reminded, her mind flickering to someone they still dismissed. Snape, though, does know about this. He's been controlling that school for a year, and what if he took down all those enchantments around the place? He wouldn't want a werewolf to be hiding out in there, let alone students using it for anything. I don't think an old crate would stop them, Remus frowned as he tried to think that through. He'd have just collapsed the tunnel, burned the place down. Lily shrugged helplessly, They weren't going to come up with anything better right now. James' hand tensed along the book, fighting back the urge to curse Snivelus once more as he'd done countless times before, but never like this. Whatever the reason Snape was in there for, he'd never forget this was his fault. Sirius snorted crudely, not at all appreciating agreeing with Voldemort at a time like this, but he'd never thought Snape made much of a difference about anything ever. Don't risk it, Remus said at once. Your best bet now would be to somehow get Voldemort's wand away from him. If you're lucky, the enchantment will just fail. If he's not lucky, Lily asked quietly. No one answered. They had no better answer. Has he? James tried to ask blandly. Have we seen him do a spell with it, really? Not literally, but I've never asked for explicit details on what he gets up to. Let's just trust him on this and be thankful for whatever. Sirius' voice died in his throat. He suddenly went rigid as he guessed at the problem. Prong's expression didn't change, and Sirius' mind began spinning back through all they knew about this wand. Lily was looking back and forth between James and the book, her mind jumbled together like mud. Afraid to understand, reality slowly trickling in. Remus had always found it an oddity so many powerful wizards were drawn to Voldemort just to beg to him. Snape, for all of his leering, insulting, and slimy personality, had never begged before. Dumbledore had, though. The bitter thought flew through Lily's mind that he'd never understood anyone besides what he wanted, but it seemed to freeze over her insides rather than igniting her fury. She could not shake away the realization of why Voldemort was even having this conversation with him. Because now he knew too, the thought was the only coherent thing Harry knew anymore. More death, on all sides, living in his head without reprieve now as he was taken back to that time, no matter how unwillingly in his mind's eye. The voice in his head sounded flat, emotionless as he remembered this end. It was too much like Voldemort's cold, lifeless voice. James found he did, though. Not like he had for Fred, anywhere near the torment it had caused him for his own two friends. But there were some grains of pity in him as he recalled that sniveling 11-year-old vying for Lily's attention, growing up to become this cold, ruthless murderer. He remembered feeling regret these past 2 weeks. If he'd ever treated Snape differently, how things could have turned out. He looked to Lily and found her trying her hardest to act like she didn't even feel this. Except for her trembling lips, she was perfectly still, glaring at the opposite wall. She was alone. No one here, no one else on Earth could ever claim to know him the way she had. They'd been each other's only friends for so long. And for a moment, James even regretted his selfishness in being a part of taking that away. He did not call her out on these feelings. She knew he would not judge her if she chose to cry or scream. He'd just be there for her when she needed it. Sirius was just frowning at the book in Prong's hands, feeling that same urge to take a shot he did every time another Death Eater fell. It wasn't really in celebration, as he'd joke about if asked, but he couldn't claim it didn't affect him either. Another human life lost, if you could call everything that little Slimeball had done to their life all for nothing any sort of human anymore. Remus watched his family around him try to find some way to take this in, put it into this new scope of a future they kept having to remodel every other second now. He thought back on all Snape had done to them already, and would do to Harry in his time, and all he could think to wonder on was, what was left? Harry tried to think of something to say to comfort his mother, seeing now what he hadn't then in a loss, but her green eyes would look at no one. HP whelp. James got to read about someone dying again, but at least this time it's not someone he actually cared about. Sucky finally for him, really, but not as bad as it could have been. I'm still counting it as 4-6 for this book. 5. Chapter 33, The Prince's Tale. Chapter text. So, the final tally was James had to read the deaths of Sirius, Snape, and Dumbledore, and arguably also had to read the worst chapters in each book. In comparison, Sirius has to read the death of Peter and Remus had to read the first chapter featuring Lily and James dying. Minor spoiler warning for those of you who really care or would have gone back to count and figure it out for yourself anyways. Harry reads his own death in the next chapter. In the grand total of them having to read bad chapters, James won, or lost really, in my opinion. How Lily lucked out of not having to read any of them, I could not tell you. This is the last chapter Sirius reads. HP. Lily. Lils, if you need to take a break, don't, she snapped, taking the book away from her husband and shoving it into Sirius' hands. He died a long time ago to me. I don't. It's not like her voice was breaking. Her face kept getting hotter, so she stopped talking and took a few deep breaths lest she let a tear escape. He got her killed and never thought twice about it. She wouldn't either. All right then. Sirius respected her wish and opened to his chapter, still glancing up every few seconds to make sure. He reminded himself, as he found his place, she always had been perfectly clear about what she wanted, though. He just hoped she'd remember if anyone knew what it felt like to feel the betrayal of a friend and then have to listen them meet such a senseless end. It was them. Sirius wanted to scold Harry for being distracted by Snape of all people and this happening, but Harry had been through so much in so little time. All he could do now was hope, with every last part of him left, that Ron and Hermione didn't die next in Harry's momentary disconnection. Ha! James didn't really laugh. The noise was more akin to a wounded animal, but still his voice rang strong as he mocked. That idiot wouldn't know what bravery was if he bottled Gryffindor's soul. Sirius grinned at his best mate. A part of him wanted to laugh along and join in, saying Voldemort didn't even belong at that school, he was so useless, but he couldn't keep his eyes away from what happened next. So what does that make yours? Wasteless, Remus sneered. 4 pairs of eyes looked to him now, a plea on their lips. Harry couldn't look at any of them, shamed for the action he hadn't taken. If he'd just gone, how many could he have saved? What world had he left behind? The question had been slowly driving him to insanity these past days as everything continued to solidify in his memory, and it was now his first real doubts arose about ever wanting to go back. If he searched within himself, if the next moment came to explain how he'd been brought here and left all this like a coward, how could he ever face them again? His own family wouldn't be able to even stand the sight of him now. He would truly be alone. I can't even say that, Sirius said quietly, but sincerely. What other end is in store for a Death Eater, really? Either they'll go down by Voldemort's hand or because of him. He didn't like making Lily flinch or his own awareness of how callously he was speaking of his brother, but he wasn't going to let himself shy away from that truth either. All the more reminder of why Voldemort needed to be ended to at least slow the flow of all this death. Harry, look at me. It was a struggle to do so, but he could no more deny her this than he had Snape. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but it's what matters most to us. We died so that you could live, and that's exactly what happened. Nobody can ask this any more of you. You've been so brave. She brushed her hand through his hair, again and again, until finally the cacophony, screams and lights dimmed from his mind once more. It did not make him feel better, but it gave a sense of gravity to his past once more he could hold onto just a little bit longer. Never even occurred to me Grop wore shoes, Remus admitted. I can see Hagrid doing it, though. James' smile was becoming more strained by the minute. He kept trying. Remus was far past rattled, right down to his soul. He'd never have thought twice about Forenza if he hadn't been mentioned. Even the oddity of a centaur teaching at Hogwarts held nothing any more to what was going on through this war. Now here was another piece he was left to imagine, a gruesome story to every injury. What life had he saved by taking that injury? Who would be next instead? Sirius had no ability to say all of that without his voice breaking every other word. He kept having to stop and clear his throat, and it just made each new time sound more broken than the last. Those twins, that family, nobody in there deserved this. Lily fidgeted uneasily. She didn't like Harry being left alone to gaze around and spot more loss. She wished he'd been drawn over with the Weasleys, or that someone had stayed with him. To leave him on his own at the entrance to this morning could only make this harder. She took his arm and held tight to him to brace them both for whatever was coming next. Nothing could have prepared her for that. She should have known it was coming, she sternly told herself as fresh tears still came free. It seemed more a fact every moment every person she cared about was to die. It wouldn't surprise her at this point if Petunia was mentioned next as a body somewhere around there, no matter how little sense it made. There was truly no one left to remember their story. Sirius, in his usual glory, did not take this quietly. Every possible scenario of how this could have happened was dumped across his mind like acid, and he cursed every one of them. Anything he could to verbalize a pain he refused to feel, for that would make it true. When that ceased to help, he got up and began storming about the room, pulling at his hair so hard he was likely to go bald before he settled down again. And still, the grief kept rising with no outlet. They used to joke that Remus would outlast them all because the Git refused to be around other people. Nobody would ever have the chance to murder him. Now Remus couldn't watch this anymore. He didn't care if it got him decked. He came forward and pulled Sirius into a rough hug, ignoring his string of profanities and offering the only comfort he ever knew to give to his friends. "You're just jealous I went out killing more Death Eaters than you." "Yeah," he relented, even clinging back for a moment before pushing him more firmly away. He went back for the book and took every last bit of comfort he could. Mooney still sat beside him, warm and decidedly alive, as he tried not to choke on the rest. The marauders were gone, but really they'd been tarnished so long ago. To continue clinging to the idea Harry had them to turn to was almost childish, but their legacy would continue through the two who deserved their lost families. James wanted to be angry at him. He wanted to do as Sirius had and call him every curse there was, and then a coward again to boot for being there that night. But he couldn't, and that just made him even more mad. He remembered back, all the way back over 2 weeks ago now, to when all of this had started, and wanting so desperately to believe this wasn't their future. They'd learned more in these few days than they had of their 7 years at school, and finding out that he and his wife would die and wouldn't be there for their son had hurt so much. He hadn't even wanted to understand the miracle of meeting his adult son. Then Sirius had died, and that was a pain so cruel he still couldn't wrap his heart around it. Then Peter, and after every single terrible thing he ever could have done to them, he'd be gone as well. Now this, and somehow this was still the worst, because it was no longer their past he was leaving behind. Why did this keep happening to their son? Why was it Harry who kept suffering for the good he did over and over? It was in half relief, half horror Sirius realized what was coming next. Harry was alone, with the memories of Snape, his only source of comfort, left. Ron and Hermione were with a family like he should be, but as always Harry was going to try and strike out on his own. Panic began bubbling in his gut like lava. He looked away to watch his godson with no idea what was coming next. Harry's visage wasn't giving him much comfort, the amount of torment on his face unparalleled. They felt all of his in waves around him, seeing but always a touch away from this future that he'd lived through. How could he keep going? Was the contents of this even worth putting on Harry? He wasn't convinced, but he knew if he tried to say anything otherwise, Harry would find out himself anyways. They were so close now, he wouldn't lose him because of serious disbelief there were any real answers left. James wasn't sure what angered him more, that still after all this Dumbledore couldn't be there when Harry needed him, or his relief at the absence. He couldn't take the old man, even as a picture, telling Harry he was still doing the right thing. Nothing felt like the right thing anymore. Remus had to swallow a screaming fit over that. It likely was no longer Dumbledore's. With any luck, McGonagall had seen to that safekeeping, which meant this was still Snape's. One bot of Harry living in those memories had nearly drove a wedge between him and his father. What could the rest contain? Lily pinched her nose for a few moments to try and convince the little sniffles to stop and suppress anything for just a little while longer. She did not care about all the history he'd leave out. She would not shed another tear because of what he'd left behind. Harry held his breath as he watched the book, half convinced it would turn into a pensive now, that the visions of blue and white flashing across his eyes would truly dump them all into the vivid world overtaking his mind. He could feel it in his bones. Everything was about to change. "Lily?" James asked in concern again. It was hard to describe the look on her face. Not quite surprise, not entirely repentance for all the previous venomous things she'd said about him. She was trying too hard to bury it all, but there was definitely something in her expression he wanted answered. She wasn't going to provide them. She still clung tight to the fury his name now represented to her. She even considered for a moment Sirius was trying to fib to make her feel better this was his first true memory. But no, he couldn't know this in such detail. Remus just looked annoyed, muttering this was the last thing Harry needed, more of his parents' past being tarnished and in ruins. Snape had the chance to leave Harry with something, more than he'd been able to do for Teddy, and he chose to focus on the most complicated relationship of his mother's life. Was this sniveling waste ever thinking of anyone but himself? So she was always. Sirius began with a sneer, but stopped at the sharp look from Lily. This day had been the last pleasant time she'd shared with her sister, and the first she'd gotten a glimpse of her future. She could hardly put into words her shock this featured so clearly in Snape's final memories, and she definitely didn't need the Marauder's commentary on it. "So you've always had a knack for charms," James said with pure fondness. He masked well the flares of jealousy on how exactly he was getting to hear of his younger wife. It only solidified for him what he'd known all along. Snape was lurking in the back, watching but never appreciating the girl's true nature, just what he wanted to see, somebody like him. James considered any person who hadn't come out already to talk to Lily instead of this coward. He always knew Snape was a waste of a life. "What's this?" Remus asked in surprise, having expected the bratty child to go sprinting home by now crying about her freak of a sister, Lily fighting back more tears even. Instead, she merely flushed and didn't answer. She'd never shared her knowledge of the root of Petunia's hatred of her. It had never been a good enough reason for the way she treated Harry to validate anything. James beamed at her and blew her a kiss while Sirius nodded without surprise. "You two just embodied the two houses you'll soon be in." "Oh, stop, the lot of you," she tried to say without blushing even more. "Why?" James asked in surprise. It was the least insulting thing Snape had done so far. "It's something crude muggles call each other," Lily shrugged, enjoying for a moment the two purebloods' baffled expressions, but both decided to let it go. The red in Lily's face dulled now, the sudden change rather alarming. Her eyes flickered to Harry in a way. She bit her lip tight and then didn't answer. She'd suspected for a long time afterwards why he always wore such loose and large clothing, but would no more share her suspicions with the Marauders than she'd ever been able to bear asking him. It was almost sad, Sirius reflected, that he seemed to have sprouted out of the womb a complete git. Was it his mother and father's poor influence, or was he just naturally that way? He scoffed and grumbled heavily at whatever the answer, mind on Malfoy and Regulus, both of whom had taken strides to show they weren't their parents just like Sirius. Whatever the answer was no excuse. "Something I've often admired about insults. Tone is everything," Remus said blandly. "A true mark of the following years of friendship," Lily voiced bitterly, still keeping a firm clamp on the ice surrounding this warm summer day. James ground up his teeth as he listened to this, unable to think of anything else for a second but how Snape took away everything, scaring Lily about this, making it so that she could never impart this wisdom with what it deserved on her future child. "Like the old Cinderella movie, I thought I was going to be someone's fairy godmother someday," she admitted with a giggle. Then she caught herself and tried to school her features back to indifference. "Relax, Mum," Harry tried to soothe. He'd been purged of his own feelings while drifting through Snape's, even for a time, and he wanted them to breathe in this as well. It would all end sooner than he'd ever wish, and they'd be thrown right back into the real world. "You can't pretend this all never happened, right?" She smiled hesitantly for a few moments before forcing herself to relax and agree. Her eyes met her husband's, and she saw in them the same understanding, same conflict he was still living through. She didn't have to deal with this alone. Where would she think wizards go to school? Sirius snorted at something so silly. Lily held her tongue but couldn't fight off the smile this time, or bother to try. Destiny to be a murderer. Remus still couldn't help the thought, but didn't bother as Lily was finally trying to unwind, and that would only make things worse. Sirius didn't have much of the same restraint. The only thing he's ever been confident about, I'm sure. Lily just ignored him, thankfully. Surely the most truthful thing he's ever said. Sirius snipped again, causing her to fidget in agitation now. Sirius, clearly having no sense of warning ever, opened his mouth again with a snide comment, but this time Lily cut in. "Stop it, you idiot. I spent more than enough time hearing you say all you like about him. Can't I just, she fumbled off, but Sirius got the message. He couldn't even imagine digging through his own mind, putting on display his most vulnerable moments, and having Peter of all people there to comfort him, hearing what Lily would have to say about that. It went against his nature, but for his friend, he shut his mouth and made an attempt to keep the rest of it to himself. "How often did that kind of thing happen?" James asked quietly, kindly even. Lily didn't see the point in lying. "Every few weeks. It was either I spend time with her and Snape got angry, or I spent time with him and this would happen. Never could manage to ever have both. James reached around Harry and rubbed her back for a moment, playing with her hair a bit. It seemed her whole life had been nothing but conflict no matter where she went, and his part in that made him suddenly sick, as he knew it hadn't gotten much better when she reached school. Lily turned her face away now, to hide how that still stung. She used to feel so bad for her sister, hated herself just as much as Petunia seemed to for making her sister feel like an outsider when all she'd ever wanted was everything Lily had. It had all burned away into her own hatred when Petunia turned that same scorn on her innocent son. But now she knew the feeling would never quite leave no matter how much she pretended otherwise. Sirius spluttered in surprise for a moment, the cruel joke of becoming Filch's little assistant on the tip of his tongue before he bit it off and pretended like nothing happened. Lily gave him an actual smile for once. Actually, that's a good point. I'd have thought she told your owl or something, but you never had one, Remus agreed. That can't be right. James ruffled his brow in confusion. Otherwise Marley would have been corrected when she sent mail along by someone in the know. Never looked into it myself, Lily admitted. I was too embarrassed by it all, and this was save Snape making a 10-year-old guess. It hurt to have to watch her correct herself again after all this time. Clearly this little trip down memory lane was only making things worse in light of everything else. But Sirius glanced at Harry and saw no way to get around this hurting someone. The knowing smile on James' face was all Harry needed to know about who those particular boys were. Is this, he began, half in excitement, half in fear, as he glanced at his mum's suddenly thin lips. Me and Sirius having the best conversation of our young life, he agreed, puffing up his chest a bit, before he turned sheepish just as fast and gave a sidelong look at his wife. Can't say it ended with the best results. Exactly how often did this happen? He just casually responds to that, Remus asked in concern. Lily played with a bit of hair for a few moments before answering quietly, again, every few weeks. Things got a bit better once we got to school. We spent more time hanging out and less arguing for a few years before it all went bad again. Wrong answer, Sirius muttered to no one with a wince, watching her steadily, the only one who could really sympathize with an outsider not understanding complicated sibling issues. Lily sighed deeply and raked her nails through her hair. She hadn't noticed, but had steadily picked up on through the years. Slowly, like molasses, with so many other warnings, she felt like a fool for choosing to ignore them even longer. If only I had been. The thought had danced around her for years afterwards. This night had been the true crossroads of her life. Then she scolded herself for letting old habits back in, forcing herself to concede that no, nothing would have changed. The first and last time, Remus snorted, just a touch sad he'd missed such a historic event. The four dorm mates hadn't officially met until that night. Sirius theatrically gasped at the slight to his pride while Harry chuckled and soothed his wounded ego. Sorry, Sirius, how could I have? My sentiments, he sniffed. James' face twisted with dislike for his past self, much to Lily's surprise until he scoffed. I can't believe it, that's the same thing Malfoy once said. You really know how to make impressions, Prongs, Sirius chuckled. Oh, how wrong I was, James smirked. He's got you there, Padfoot. You are many things. All right in the head is not one, Remus snickered while Sirius rolled his eyes at the two. Maybe, it's a possibility, just a sparse chance really. You're an idiot. Lily cut him off and pleasantly reminded him all at once. It's so much fun, you should try it some time. He shrugged without remorse. Rinse and repeat for the next 5 years, James sighed with a strange look on his face. Not quite enjoyment of this glimpse of his past, but so many things had happened that day, the good and the bad. So much had changed since then, and still so much remained the same. She still does that. Can't imagine why she never took to me. Sirius grinned without remorse, while Lily clucked her tongue at the idiot. No, gluing the giant squid to the ceiling and getting yourself caught in your own idiotic plan is a laugh, Sirius snarled, not even seeming to realize he'd let slip their own most embarrassing moment in his outrage. That was that. He trailed off in disgust, and Harry couldn't even bring himself to ask what had happened to the poor girl. Apparently, I have to do with everything, James muttered, without a drop of conceit in his voice. Remus flinched and didn't look at her. He didn't want to know what nasty comments Snape had made about him even before he had proof. She never thought we were, especially at this point, Sirius snorted. He's so focused on getting you to agree with his bad-mouthing he doesn't even know you. Lily fought back a wave of exhaustion, as if every one of these multiple fights were drowning her at once. Why were they hearing of this? What was the point? Were Snape's last thoughts really about rehashing all the mistakes in their youth? She'd spent her past years trying to forget all this and thought he had too. Oh, the three marauders muttered in surprise as they got their time frame and winced on Lily's part. This wasn't long until that moment then. Ooh, he's in trouble, James muttered to no one. Oh, look, he does have some smarts, Sirius snorted. She tells me that herself more than enough, James Mark agreed, getting a slight giggle out of his wife. Lily swallowed painfully around the lump in her throat. She had not been as unaware of his crush as his role playing with Mulciber and all those other horrid friends at this age, but she fought against ever letting herself feel the same for so long it had never had the chance to flourish. If he'd stopped being so mean to Tooney, she'd once told herself, maybe she'd hold his hand and really see him smile. If he'd stopped laughing at all the cruel muggle-born jokes his friends said and then glanced guiltily at her, she'd maybe lay in his arms, an old youthful wish. If Save had ever stood up to those nasty friends of his, she would have kissed him on the spot she'd been so sure of once. It had never happened, and it never would. I'm surprised you didn't let him, James told her honestly. He'd been under the impression they'd never spoken again. Pity foretook the soul, she whispered, keeping her own reasons to herself. She wanted him to see her face, to see the hurt she'd hidden from him and everyone in front of that crowd. She wanted their last meeting to just be between them. What? Lily asked of no one, her face finally losing the grief of her lost youth to join the confusion of the others. Gone with their shared experience, here was finally a path she'd often wondered about, but never for more than a moment. Was this finally it? Was she finally going to get the lie told that had made Dumbledore trust him so explicitly? Potter, Lily corrected with dignity, even as she felt her soul draining out of her. She knew exactly when this was as much as the boys, but their reignited anger for Snape once again, being the one to bring this up, had nothing on hers. So what? She still didn't understand. Why did this Death Eater care? He made it clear long ago he'd never care about her as much as he did Voldemort's ways. All those past memories had only proved that to her. The memory that had ended Harry's childhood through Voldemort's eyes swam through Lily's mind like sludge. One key part she suddenly became aware of she'd never thought twice about. Voldemort had been there to kill her son. That's all she'd ever focused on. The rest had been trivial. Now, his marking, his contemplation of ignoring her rather than just murdering her finally let something die in her for good. She didn't have to shield herself from those memories they'd shared. They were gone now to never come back. She was all he cared about, which meant he could never understand. If her family had died without her, she would never forgive and forget who had turned Voldemort on them in the first place. James could see it. The dead look on his wife's face that showed she wasn't taking in a word of this anymore, the harsh face of Dumbledore as he watched this. In some small, twisted way, he almost admired Snape having the gall to do such a thing, ask Voldemort to save the Muggle-born's life, turning to Dumbledore and begging him to do the same now. All for Lily, how he'd truly do anything for her. Anything. The word echoed in his head and flickered to life all they'd heard, and how much of it suddenly made sense. He didn't need to hear the rest, but that didn't stop Sirius from continuing. Sirius seemed determined to cut through every last word, find every last miserable excuse this slimeball had come up with to justify what he'd done. It made no difference to him. He'd stabbed that grease bucket in the throat the first chance he got for causing Lily so much grief, for being the reason Prongs was questioning every life choice. He could see it in his friend's face, feel it in the air. Snape would always think of what he wanted first, and literally, damn anyone else. Lily shook her head slowly from side to side, feeling the knowledge surround her, but it still having no effect. She'd been right all along, and she despised every second of it. The good he'd finally done in standing up to Voldemort was one mistake too many in the making. Potter, James corrected on instinct, the tugging feeling in his soul only growing stronger. She'd died in his last name, the girl born with those eyes Snape knew so well gone to the world now. Sirius felt strange letting all of this come through his mouth. For the longest time, he'd only cared about Lily as James' girlfriend. She'd been such a shrew for so long in the past, he'd never understood his mate's fancy in her. The friendship that had formed between them had been glacier slow since, but there was no doubt in his mind. Now he'd grieve her loss as much as James for the true sister she'd become. To share that with Snape of all people, but he brushed aside the first human moment he was seeing and grit his teeth before he could keep going. Wahlburger had loved too, that hadn't made her worth his time. Remus gave a bleak, painful sort of laugh as he wondered at that moment what Snape had truly resolved in himself. After all, he'd set out to kill Dumbledore 16 years later, had been a ghastly person to everyone around him with no clear change because of this moment. All that secret between them housed was further distrust for those who would have comforted Snape, but instead loathed him and Dumbledore more. Obviously nothing like his mother, Sirius sneered. Kind, patient, actually made an attempt to follow the rules at one point in his life and felt guilty for losing house points, because Snape would never see that until his last breath. Lily muttered some long-ago curse once more for finally getting her answer in that. He had known all along, he'd known everything and told nothing. It's no wonder the two protected each other's secrets. Sirius looked insulted at the idea. Bravery is courage, standing and facing the fight, not fleeing and conniving your way around the fight until the convenient moment to fight back. He had the chance to do that, Harry quietly corrected. He didn't, he stayed. Harry stopped before he could say anything else, eyes drifting back to the book for more. Sirius was still flush with anger. He didn't agree at all. James watched wearily between the two, now afraid of how this was going to end. He was watching his son rub at his temple, eyes glued to the book as every memory was peeled back. He watched Sirius get more and more angry. Snape's original crime had been forgotten in Dumbledore's eyes because of his grief. He could feel a fight coming, and didn't like the idea of the fence he was straddling. Oh, shite. He really thought that was the resurrection stone, too. Remus yelped. And yet he still broke it, James whispered. Harry sat up with strict attention now. The sorrow of his family was not forgotten, but this was more important. It would all make sense now, it had to. A year to what? Remus refused to understand. There was something there, a glimmer of an answer right on the brink, but no one would say it, nobody even dared think it possible. A trick, a plan that was shared with no one. Surely Dumbledore hadn't. And there was the irrefutable truth that meant everything to Harry, even in the way he'd gotten it. Dumbledore had known all along and accepted this fate, just like he had to. But he didn't, Sirius said in cold fury. The little bat took flight the second things didn't go his way, rather than staying and defending the school. Neville had to run for his life. Seamus was unrecognizable, he was so injured. Dumbledore was still wrong to trust him above everyone. A betrayal had been what destroyed his family in every way possible. If Dumbledore had just told the Order, told Harry about this, who could have been saved? Voldemort might not have even gotten so far along, slaughtered so many families all because of Snape and Dumbledore's secrets. He tried to, Harry defended, sounding just as amazed at himself as Sirius clearly did for this act. He only went to Voldemort when he had no choice. Then he tried to find me first. There's always a choice, Sirius barked back. Instead of running like a coward when McGonagall defended you, he could have let her pass, announced his side to fight with the school. This idiot made the same mistake over and over, putting his own plan above everything. Sirius, he was doing all he knew how. He was being brave like my mother, trying to do what was right, doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. Sirius wouldn't relent any more than Harry. Harry looked thrown, but guarded in this knowledge, a safety that he could look back in his years now and treasure. Sirius didn't understand. He refused to see any side but his own, just like he was accusing Snape of doing. Obviously not. It wouldn't be damned near as dramatic, Remus muttered while wondering if his head had been cut off at some point without his knowing. I don't think I've ever appreciated Snape's sarcasm before, James muttered for himself. That ship long sailed, Lily said through numb lips, and Harry shivered down to his soul at the detached way she managed to say that. Of all the people he'd thought would understand, he'd counted on her. She just looked done, though, done with Dumbledore and Snape and everything outside of this home. He never told him about the Horcruxes, James said in surprise. He never told anyone but Harry about that. They'd known this before about the order, but somehow James had thought during all of this that had been shared after the ring incident that there was someone out there Dumbledore trusted implicitly. I can see why, Sirius sneered. Man spends too much time letting Voldemort rummage around in his head to prove what a good little Death Eater he is. Can't let something like this slip. There was something there, growing more powerful by the second, but James was too terrified to either look away or concentrate on. A small, last piece of information that he wondered how long he'd known without acknowledging it. There was silence following that for a long time. Harry was the only one who could move, his fingers reaching up once more to trail the mark with trembling fingers. His parents moved first, each trying to hug him to them like they'd never let go. Lily let her nails dig in painful to her baby, a righteous fury that would never end. Dumbledore should have just killed Harry that same night, because the outcome he sought would never happen. James just kept promising over and over it changed nothing for them. They still loved their son with everything. The idea had been available long before now. The pieces there for anyone to put together this was the real answer. But it didn't change their son. This was not how he would have ever guessed they'd take to this news, but he clung back now to hide what they refused to see. There was no other way. It helped to know everything, but it didn't change things, not really. Harry clung to his family for the last time. HP, so yeah. The dramatic reveal you've all been waiting for. I've always seen Lily as a loving person who tries to find the best in everyone, but knows when to call their bullshit when she hits her limit. And that's exactly how this is in the end. James is still an optimist who will always put everyone before him, and that grudgingly includes the people who care for his son. Remus has the most perspective from him, seeing the good and the bad. Sirius will always see an arsehole. An interesting finally for him, to be sure at least. Headcanon, Dolohov used his signature spell he used 3 times back in Beyond the Veil, was finally able to use it verbally on Remus. I know it doesn't really make a difference if it had been this, or Avada Kedavra, but yeah. Fun fact for the 5 people who haven't heard this one yet, the Marauders died in reverse order of how they appear on the Marauders map, and more than that, they all died trying to protect Harry, even Peter. 4. Chapter 34, The Forest Again. Chapter text. This is the last chapter that Harry reads. Fear of the inevitable curled inside Harry, leaving him frozen and unable to pull away as he knew he must. Here was the reason why fate itself seemed to align him on this path. If Ron and Hermione had been there to witness, he could have no more done his task then. Had he, though? Sudden, live panic burst in him hotter than any feeling before. Was this finally the reason he was here? Had he fled with this knowledge, tried to go to a time and place where it wouldn't matter? His parents misunderstood, saw what went through him, and instead lent more comfort. It's not true, Harry, it just can't be. Why does Dumbledore think only Voldemort can kill the Horcrux inside me? He helped along. I don't know, but does it matter? He's right, it's always been this moment. No, it hasn't. His mother's fury broke over, matching his own. You're your own person. No matter what happened that night, that's never changed. Hasn't it? He asked calmly now. Discussing this helped, staying out of his head and engaging with them like he had for weeks kept him clear. Look at everything that's happened to me, how many people suffered because of me. What if that Horcrux inside me all along? He kept going more loudly when he saw further interruption. What if the Dursleys were so awful to me because that bit of Voldemort's soul corrupted them? What if this was the reason the prophecy meant me all along? My soul was always doomed. What if this is why Sirius started getting so distant with me? Harry. He had to take a few gasping breaths. He had not realized his voice was rising, and he'd been fooling himself. It wasn't clarity that had been consuming him, leading him to demand answers. It had been an out, some way to try and talk himself into this not being true, and now he was left with nothing. Listen, James pleaded, speaking slowly and clearly now so Harry heard every word. Those Dursleys were horrible, despicable people before you even met them. That prophecy was not some magic crystal ball. And I didn't even know about this, let alone let it affect me. Sirius finished, completely aghast Harry could say such a thing. I think you did know. Harry countered, eyes still on nothing in here. I think Dumbledore did tell you what he suspected was inside me, and that was just another reason he kept Sirius locked away. I don't think he told him until after Voldemort came back, though, and it was all the more reason Sirius never tried to force Dumbledore into letting me leave Privet Drive. Snape and Sirius were the only two that knew. Asterisk. I don't know, Harry. I still find it hard to believe I didn't tell you. Sirius hedged, even if it did explain some of his odd behavior. Nobody had denied how distant and distracted he'd been during that time. Would you have really wanted to? Sirius looked him in the eyes and realized Harry was right. It was selfish in every way it was to be, but looking at the only child of James, he was already imagining trying to form the words in his head of telling the kid that the man who'd murdered his brother was still somehow attached to his godson through a bit of soul. There weren't words possible. Harry nodded like Sirius had said all this aloud. His silence in answer didn't surprise him. There was something too real about putting Sirius' involvement into this. It was clear none around him had found the same conclusion he had, but he wasn't going to sit around and debate this either. He had a plan, and he was going to see it through. No alternatives this time, no one to swoop in and save him. He took the book from his godfather's slack fingers and read with purpose. No, Lily said again, and would keep saying until something on earth shifted to make way for her son to live. This was not his end. He was not slated to die after all he'd been through. She was going to kill Dumbledore and Snape for doing this to him. Harry hardly heard her. The denial merely an echo of his own, but he wouldn't acknowledge until he had his proof that he was right. That this was going to happen, he'd never been so sure of anything. James wondered if he was dying. Surely this is what it felt like. To bear witness to his son he'd died trying to save, convince himself he had no choice. What Voldemort had done to him merely ended his existence. This was decaying it. Sirius would not stop Harry from remembering all this, because it would only hurt his godson. He needed to do this to become whole and complete the man he was. It was false, though, and the moment Harry's mind was free to think for itself again, he'd do everything in his power to prove otherwise. Until then, he could only witness what it was doing to his family, the hellish cycle it caused in them to see nothing but this for Harry. Death was greedy. It took everything for itself in the end, but not impatient. Death would wait however long it needed to. And something of a recent story involving death tickled in Remus' mind, just out of grasp, as his brain seized once again on knowing they would all die before they got their real chance at life. Lily was growing beyond anger at her inability to make Harry hear what he was saying. She wished she could rage and scream, kick down every door in the world, and kill whoever had caused this in him. But for now, she had to settle with holding him painfully tight to make sure this stayed solely in his head in a moment of panic, something her son was misconstruing as clarity. Someone certainly was going to die for doing this to him. Yeah, because Ron would hit you, and Hermione would rightfully talk you out of it, Sirius said quietly. Harry ignored him too. All eyes fell on it now. It had somehow become the symbol of everything those from this time both loved and hated of this future all at once, representing everything they'd ever wanted from him and taken away from them. Now, Harry was still choosing to look past it, not see that he'd always been better off with others at his side, to help him through this last crisis. Still, he only took Dumbledore's word as law, and refused to see any other option that Dumbledore declaring this was the only way. His family, the Weasleys and his parents, had given him everything, but Dumbledore had only ever imparted the worst in Harry's life. Another death he would have stepped in front of, another family never put back together. He could feel the energy around him, same as he had that day in his mind, but he did not let it affect him any more now than he had then. Remus' mind buzzed painfully now, like it was flying backwards in reverse, trying to de-age Neville into that silly kid afraid for his toad from days ago. Harry's death that same day would not have stopped that from happening any more than it would this day. If not Voldemort, then there would always be someone else to step in and put the world to a test. Why did Harry always put it on himself to change this? As Harry had been the one saying all of this, it took them a second to realize he was calling out to him. Then, for just that second, hope seized them. That this insanity Harry was under had ended, he'd snapped out of it and was telling Neville everything. Then they really gazed at Harry and saw his mind at work once more, but not for what they'd hoped. Neville's my favorite person right now, counting you, Harry, Sirius declared. Harry smiled at him. It was an eerie look, too calm, missing the light in his eyes, the color in his face, more like someone had painted it on. The one time, James whispered, looking near tears now at the past days crashing around him. Sirius had to use every last bit of will be possessed to fight back the urge against knocking Harry upside the head when he wanted it to be Dumbledore. Harry should not go out like this, into the gallows with no other path. They could die every day fighting this war, but it didn't mean they'd surrender to Voldemort in the simple hope it would end this. There was no proof what Dumbledore said was true. Speaking of, Lily managed through gritted teeth, if you're some possessed Horcrux like you seem to think, then why wouldn't the basilisk have simply killed it inside you when it had the chance? That brought Harry up short for a moment, before his eyes flickered to the wet logs where flames had warmed this house, and he'd swear a phoenix materialized itself as answer. Fox healed me. The Horcrux lived same as I did. He was merely the container like Nagini. So long as she lived, so did the Horcrux within her, why she needed to die, not merely have it removed somehow and placed into something else, if that were even possible. Would not waste more lives and put this off like a coward in the measly hope it were true. And so it would continue. Everything in that moment would simply play on repeat for the rest of time. Harry and Neville's loyalty and openness to each other, and then onward, each to see another form of death. Why couldn't Harry see that he was doing nothing to stop this cycle? Sirius ruffled with indignation those were who Harry thought of first, because they were the ones Harry had always managed to learn the worst about. Whether they liked it or not, those two had played more a role in Harry's life than they ever had, and these were the end results. James had long since envied all that Hagrid had been for Harry's life. A better role model, father figure even, than anyone else he could have named. The irony not lost on him, he'd never thought twice about the gamekeeper in his son's short few months of life with him. Hagrid had been there for his first trip to Diagon Alley, attended his first Quidditch game, was there when his son needed to know about the big things of the magical world and the small precious details like how even the smallest hippogriff life mattered. Harry had watched him be ripped from his life, and it was no wonder his son had given up. No, Lily mouthed, beyond words in her anger now, this time directed inwards. She'd said something like this herself hours ago, never for a second putting together the connection the close, the death that Stone was linked to would open for her son. James' friends had all fallen in protection for Harry. All she'd ever been able to leave him with was herself. Petunia, Snape, they only ever made his life worse. Now, the one thing she'd given him, he was giving up. The graveyard had been it. Lily knew without a second thought. She didn't need this sick feeling holding her captive of how unright this felt to know the ghosts that appeared to Harry, offered him words of comfort to fight back against Voldemort. Help him escape had been the magic Harry needed. This was a last attempt of too many manipulation in his life being brought down around her son. What if he died in Little Hangleton? What if Voldemort's spell had won then? Would it not have been over just as soon, served its same purpose? They would have known that and accepted it, lay their son to rest then. This was not them, and her urge to kill death itself for choosing those Harry had needed most in his life, but been denied for this final act was beyond words. It broke something inside of him, but James only clung tighter to his son. He would not let that be the last thing Harry heard from him. Harry, we died trying to protect you. Why will we turn around now and accept this? No, I'm sorry, son, this stone is leading you to death, not us. Harry didn't understand. They were the same thing to him and always had been. While the thought of his parents had been a source of comfort, the childish thought had been stripped free, and he now saw his parents' meeting could only be in a world no one wanted to be in. The smallest voice piped up then how had he come to be here, seeing them, really looking at them and quite alive. Was this it then? His afterlife. He welcomed it. But they should have. No matter the completely assured way Harry spoke every word as if convinced it would be his last, he sat before them now. He must snap out of it. He must see that his parents would never stand by and let him do something like this, when they'd once given their lives for him to have a chance. Harry, Lily pleaded. She didn't know why. It's not as if it would stop whatever madness had possessed him, fight away whatever this demon wrapped around him at that time was, but she would never stop trying. We died trying to save you. How could you? Why would you ever? Harry couldn't look at her, wouldn't look at any of them. He wondered how his own death had changed his perception, or more kept it the same as he relived this, but they were still in denial. Was this his purpose here, to help them to move on as well as himself? When they accepted his fate against Dumbledore, he thought they'd understood, but there was no more fight to be had. Surely they'd see that. Sirius couldn't help but wonder for a moment what they thought of all this. Were some like Regulus, disillusioned and regretting their life, wishing to make a difference, but in too late for another way out, like the Malfoys? Were there some in that clearing mourning losses and family like the Weasleys? Others enjoying the carnage and waiting impatiently for it to resume? He'd never thought twice about a Death Eater's motives before, but now after Snape and Regulus, he found himself wanting to look at every one of them and really ask why they were such despicable people. Hagrid was still alive. Feeling flooded back into Harry almost painfully fast, the acceptance he'd managed through reading this now cut clean like he'd bit his own tongue off. Hagrid should not have to see this, when Harry could still have a chance to have Sunday tea with him. The ring on his finger suddenly felt white hot, and the walls around his mind, barring him from his memories, were crumbling with every word now. Why was he wearing that? A wish fulfillment in this delusion world, where he could only dream of marrying the love of his life. No, that wasn't right. It was real and tangible, and Ginny needed him to come back to her. They saw the change in Harry, but only felt the tiniest bit of relief at the fire lit in him. One last bright spot to be snuffed out, and then what? Would Lily's final act for him still protect despite his best efforts? What then? They felt forever trapped in the question, how had Harry survived this? He's gone, Lily finally whispered, burying her face in James' chest as she felt the full echo of that reverberate in here, just how many left that night, and what they'd almost lost. HP, probably going to be a controversial chapter, but I regret nothing. Mini story explanation for this that ends with a plug to yet another Carlin Brothers episode, whom I swear are not paying me to do this. I just love them because they embody every fanatical HP theory I've ever thought up myself with satisfying answers. But this moment in series is yet another of those things that bothered me after I finished. Now, when I first read it, I had no problems with this, and even on the 13th time reading this book, I still got choked up reading it. But somewhere about the 333rd time I read this, something started to bother me. A little tickle in my brain that wouldn't leave me be, so I read it again. And that time, the resurrection stone and Dumbledore's explanation for it in the next chapter pissed me off. I've made it clear the Deathly Hallows themselves annoy me, but at this point, I was just passively used to J.K. doing this. But the Resurrection Stone one in particular didn't mesh well at all, and the more I thought about it, the more I want to call bull on what it does, which is cause people to become suicidal. Think about it. Every person who comes into contact with it dies as surely as those who use the Elder Wand. But this one's not even subtle about it. Dumbledore threw all caution out the window of what this thing was because he wanted to see his sister. Understandable, but would have certainly led to his death in any other person, and still eventually would have done him in. Then, when he knew that Harry needed to die for this to work, he bequeathed it to him, to ensure it would get him killed. Harry's parents convinced him it was a good idea to finish dying, when they died trying to save his life. Resurrection stone my ass. It doesn't resurrect anything but death. It does no more than what a ghost would have done in this circumstance, an embodiment of another form of death leading people to their doom. That, in my opinion, was not Lily, James, Sirius, and Remus. That was a twisted version of a spectre who wanted another soul, but the process failed this time, likely breaking the cycle, and the stone forever vanished. Look up the Carlin Brothers video on the Resurrection Stone for their idea on this. An interesting side note that I'm sure was unintentional on JK's part, but another parallel of death. We don't know what happened to it, just like we'll never really know what happens after death. The Elder Wand was broken, just like death ends us all, but Harry kept the invisibility cloak in use, just like death will always be present. Remember when I said to remember that third asterisk in St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries? I want you to rewind back to the entire fifth book now. Sirius, in every slight indication he made, felt like there was some kind of distance between them now that wasn't there before, and I think it wasn't Sirius looking for James in Harry. It was Sirius now knowing there was some of Voldemort in him. For example, Harry telling Sirius about his experience inside Nagini in Grimmauld Place's kitchen. Remember Sirius' reaction, or more accurately, the lack thereof. No shock, no comfort for his godson. Just did you tell Dumbledore about this? His face was in shadows the whole time, clearly illustrated by J.K.'s always profound word choices. To be honest, this does make me love Sirius even more, if that were possible, because I firmly believe Sirius knew all this and still loved Harry. He only didn't tell out of the respect for James he still had. Not telling his only child this fact somehow preserved his best friend for that while longer. I do, however, believe that Sirius would have told eventually. The man would crack before long, especially when he heard about Harry's false vision about himself with Voldemort. If he'd found out about that, he'd have told Harry everything, making J.K. decide to kill him. As always, if you disagree, please feel free to send back anything you like. This bothered me for a while, and I couldn't think up a good answer. We know Voldemort went there that night to kill Harry and make a new Horcrux, so his soul was all prepped to do just this, and I'm guessing that's why it left him and attached itself to Harry as the only living thing. Why a living thing, though? Why not any other thing in that room, as the Horcrux's other receptacles are all non-living things? Why didn't this happen every time Voldemort died? Why didn't the one in Harry just jump to anything else over the years if it ever sensed Harry's soul was going to die? How sentient are these Horcruxes? Enough so that one tried to come back to life by possessing Ginny. If it hadn't been killed and it had the forethought, could it have permanently jumped into Ginny, the nearest living thing, and she to become the next Horcrux? What about Ron right before he stabbed the Locket? Just because Voldemort put them in one thing, does it permanently anchor them? Or like when the one leaped from Voldemort's soul and latched onto Harry, could any of them have done this? I know in the next chapter we see what's left of Voldemort's soul as the broken thing it is, and the series is done. But I half convinced myself there for a minute some part of him lived on in this way. After all, there were an abundance of people in the great hall for his soul to latch onto the nearest living thing, and they might not have a scar to show they lived through it. But that's not a part of the Horcrux process. That was a separate byproduct of what Lily did for Harry. If we'd only ever gotten more details of how Horcruxes were made, my mind would be put to rest, and I'd get to know what exactly happened that one Halloween night to make a part of Voldemort's soul do just that. But it doesn't seem likely to ever happen, as reportedly the only person J.K. ever told vomited. I don't particularly buy this myself, and think it's an exaggeration in our very horror-fueled life, where we live with detailed assassinations, cannibalism, rape, and all manner of stomach-clenching nightmare fuel in most books, and people don't vomit over that. Okay, extensive end done now, I promise. 3. Chapter 35, King's Cross. Chapter text. This is the last chapter that Remus reads. HP. Harry saw Remus reach out to take the book from him, watching as if any second he was going to fade from their eyes. He couldn't let it go. He clung tight to the cover and didn't know how to release it, to know that whatever came next was death. But not once had they considered the option. Adamant through what he'd thought were his last moments that this was not Harry's true path. He trusted them to see what he couldn't, and with an agonizing breath, released the book for the last time. This is getting into way more of a theoretical conversation than I ever wanted to happen in this room, Sirius muttered, still staring intently at Harry. It felt odd to Harry. His skin crawled a bit. For the first time since he'd woken up here, he realized how strange it was to be around them, near constantly in someone's presence for days on end. For the first time, he really wanted to do this alone, without all eyes on him. He'd certainly felt embarrassed before, ashamed even, for every thought and feeling he had to be open, but never this urge to hold such a moment tight to him and for no one else. He had the sudden urge to slap the book out of Remus' hands again, tell them to go off for a moment while he got this memory back on his own, and they would have. He knew without a doubt if ever he'd asked them, they would have respected it. He couldn't do it, though. Just as the words were about to escape his lips, he looked at them all again and knew what he'd be taking away from them. All he'd ever wanted was to share his life with his family, and he wouldn't deny them a single moment. So instead he just laughed at Sirius like he always did and urged Remus to keep going. James opened his mouth with a curious expression in place. It was clear his mind had automatically jumped to something other than clothes to extort this with. But the idea of laughing about this was gone as soon as it had appeared as he kept watching his son, far more pressing things on his mind. Lily's maternal instinct kicked in at once. The idea of the child being described had her wanting to rush forward and see what she could do. Then she really heard what was being told and recoiled on instinct. Was this it then? The flayed bit of Horcrux, Voldemort's soul inside Harry all along. Was Harry there to kill it? What then? Harry seemed to have survived the killing curse again because he had given himself up to it, a theory she'd unintentionally started and her son was trying to prove. What next? Why hadn't she wound up in some sort of limbo and come back from it for her baby? Oh, Merlin! Sirius groaned into his hands at once. Oh, Dumbledore now, James half laughed. Remus looked for a moment like he was going to be sick as he tried to take in this new development. Dumbledore had been so central for so much of his life, not to mention the turbulence he'd caused in Harry's, yet he could still go up to the castle right now and talk to him about it all. Harry shouldn't be able to do that anymore, so whatever was happening now felt like a blow to his mind. This was too surreal to simply keep going like an old textbook, but what else could they do? It's not as if they could stop now. Oh good, we have one fact around here. Lily yelped, half hysterical now for something solid to take place. It was a fact they all knew without validation, but in Dumbledore of all people finally confirming it, some dam seemed to release in them as well. We knew, Lily whispered, eyes still on her son. The whole time, we had to. It's the only thing that made sense. Then why didn't we bloody tell him? Sirius demanded of nothing. He'd never believe it of himself, letting Harry walk into that in such a way. I can't hardly say I would have went around telling him about the time I tried to pants Snape, and you hardly went out of your way to tell Harry about, well, everything that happened when you got out of Azkaban. You wanted to fix it yourself first. James said with forced calm. He wasn't much happier about this either. It still wasn't sitting right with him. This was how he spent his last moments with his son. We like to think we'll always be honest with him, but then reality settles in, and we still want to protect him. Harry was hardly listening. It didn't make a difference to him, in the grand scheme of things, if they knew or it had been some trick of a Hallow. The truth, he realized, was that Dumbledore and his parents and everyone he'd ever cared about him more than anything, and he them in return. Protecting those, even from the truth, was just another part of that. It didn't matter in the end who had told what, he decided as he traced his scar, but not the one on his forehead. And still all four around Harry flinched, an instinct so deeply ingrained in them they'd never shake it even hearing what they were. It was not a fact they ever wished to align with their life. Now Harry touched the scar on his forehead as he thought long and hard about that. It crept up on him like a shadow, how it would never actually pain him again, even if Voldemort lived. Would he ever be able to speak Parseltongue? Was his magical ability diminished? He watched his family think nothing of this, Remus even scoffing for a moment and saying it always had been. They'd never let Voldemort's presence in his life define him, and he wouldn't either. Would that have really made a difference now? Lily struggled not to sound revolted, but it had never been a kindness to her imagination when Voldemort did that. From what I'm hearing, the killing curse killed, well, the part of Voldemort's soul in Harry instead of, well, Harry. My protection, what saved him all those years ago, I don't see how it would have an unlimited affect. Harry curled an arm around her shoulders while he followed easily along, and James started playing with her hair again. The little family had suffered enough. It was time they got all of their questions answered, and still they knew Dumbledore couldn't give a full explanation. No one ever could. But so when he tried to kill Harry, he died too? Sirius asked in surprise. It sort of makes sense, Remus said slowly. He would have shattered like he did that Halloween night. He used Harry's blood to regenerate a new body, and then destroyed the source, maybe that. He trailed off and then mimed an explosion. A shoddy bit of magic he used then. He'd always have to find a new blood of the enemy to resurrect him, and keep doing it every time that person died. James frowned. Maybe it was just because Voldemort killed him, though. If anyone else had done it, this may not have happened the same. Lily shrugged. That's what Dumbledore's saying. Voldemort tangled us together in a way nobody ever would have guessed, Harry agreed. Remus only managed to say that through gritted teeth, that he'd lied to Harry about this for so long. He should have told him at 16 when he was sharing everything. He should have told Arthur and Marley, him and Sirius. This should not have been Dumbledore's little secret. I'm not sure I followed that one at all, James muttered, going cross-eyed a bit in the end as he kept that all in line. The wand Voldemort used in the graveyard lost, so your wand kept a bit of its power, but spit it back up at Voldemort when you fought again, when he used Malfoy's wand. That's what I got out of it, Remus agreed. Should I be taking notes? You mean no one's been doing that this whole time? Sirius sighed. Could be more of that Voldemort used his blood so connected them thing, Lily reminded as she picked at her nails. Just because the wand's twin wasn't present, it still recognized Voldemort. What I'm starting to wonder is, could you two ever have a proper duel, or is this just going to be a recurring thing, or would have been, if Voldemort wasn't dead now? Sirius asked. He knew he should feel far more elated at the words from his mouth, but he couldn't find much joy. He was too worried about how Harry was going to get out of this. Was he going to get another visit from his parents wanting him to stay? How long could Harry and Dumbledore keep talking before the clock was up? What would he be leaving behind? Harry watched his dad grind his teeth impatiently and Sirius mutter a few more swears. He knew they still blamed Dumbledore for a majority of those sufferings. They still felt wronged by him, and he should have done better, done more for him. Lily and Remus just looked resigned, their anger reserved for others in this scheme that had gone on around Harry's life. For Remus it was himself. He'd always hate he hadn't done more to be there in Harry's life. He was no better than Dumbledore hiding away all this time when he could have had years to be there for Harry. He was no better than him. Harry couldn't find any resentment at all. No matter what Dumbledore had or had not done for him, he knew his life would have wound up in that moment. Lily offered an uneasy laugh, but a genuine one all the same. It made sense, of course. The first time Harry had escaped the life those horrible muggles put on him. Hagrid had offered him that opening, and he'd taken it without hesitation. That's nothing new, Sirius promised. He was already writing out his resignation from the Order in his head, lest he actually take his fury out on Dumbledore for something the old man wouldn't have a chance of understanding. Remus fought hard against the sympathy that swelled in him, his automatic desire to sit politely and hear out Dumbledore's explanation for this. All they'd wanted from him was an answer, and here he was finally giving one after his death with an apology to boot. Was it going to be enough? Lily smiled to herself as she watched her son. It always amazed her how easily his anger would switch off as easily as it could be lit. She clung to hers without shame. She wouldn't forgive and forget to those who didn't deserve it. James Potter took over 6 years to learn from his mistakes, and others like Snape never seemed to. Had Dumbledore finally managed his own after his death? She listened attentively, a hot coal still burning in her gut, but still half hopeful she could douse it with the right act of contrition. I was born there, Harry whispered in surprise, turning accusing eyes on them. Lily chewed on her lip for a moment before James admitted, it wasn't a detail you'd ever asked for. This is your home. Yes, Lily gave birth there, had a midwife from the village come up and help her along. We'd been in a neighboring town for a visit, and she was very kind to help us on such short notice. By the time we learned what else happened in Godric's Hollow, he cut off with a pained wince, and Harry understood. They had not wanted him to associate his life and their death even more inexplicably. A question still left unanswered in James' mind now. Had Dumbledore stopped testing the properties when he heard what happened out of guilt? What were the limitations of his most treasured object? He was desperate to know now, were Harry and Dumbledore wrong? The question was alive in Lily now, the urge to know everything, but she kept her mouth shut and the idea to herself. Dumbledore seemed to know all in this afterlife. He'd certainly kept up with all Harry had learned inexplicably, which meant wherever he was. Well, when he wasn't telling Harry, all this meant he had access to whatever knowledge he liked. He knew of that, she was sure, but the answer he would not give seemed to speak for itself. If it had been his wand to do the deed, she felt he may not have been able to speak of this at all. If Grindelwald, he would have said so, for there was no reason to keep that to himself. There was only one person left, a boy whom Albus had been singing the praises of, shown nothing but guilt and love for as a sign of forgiveness. Perhaps Dumbledore had known for 7 years already, when the mirror itself had shown him the answer. Familiarity breeds acceptance, Sirius quietly agreed, mind on his own unpleasant upbringing and how normal talk of murder had been. Eyes on Harry, the same age as them, what had passed into their usual day-to-day now. Remus didn't bother to hide, wiping his nose on his sleeve for a moment, finding his eyes misting a bit and sniffling in sorrow. At least he had that eventually, not long after this mess. Albus would have gotten to see them again. Lily brushed at her eyes for a moment, but found them surprisingly dry. Itchy even, with so much moisture previously collecting and having dried in place. She understood. She could even see how a man like Dumbledore would fall into this trap, afraid to trust and let such secrets out, the few he had making things go so wrong. It didn't mean she'd let him in her son's life again, not after all this, but she didn't hate him in the end. James gave a bitter sort of laugh, like he thought Remus was directing the question directly at him. I see a man who learned too much, and not enough. He brought it on himself and dragged Harry down with him. So you guys still hate him now? Harry asked quietly. Remus was pleasantly surprised in himself to say no. The perfect man he'd know had been shattered beyond repair. He would never look to someone so blindly for an answer on anything again. But he looked at Harry and found in him how Dumbledore could do it. He thought of his son, so desperate to put a wall between them, to have no part of Teddy's life for fear of what he'd do to him. Dumbledore had tried the same, and it had nearly worked for the good of all wizarding and muggle kind alike. He'd do everything he could to keep Harry away from this like his friends were planning, but he'd stay close to Dumbledore and see what he could do to help everyone in the end find a peaceable bridge. The two parents exchanged a look. They were gauging each other, wanting one to speak before they shared their own opinion, even if it wouldn't change their own, but as usual Sirius butted in to speak for everyone. I won't pull a Snape and pitch him off the nearest tower any time soon, but I bloody won't be letting him make plans for my life, he stated. Lily flushed and gave him a dirty look for the simile, even if she did agree that was still tasteless of him to say. Harry tried to see it as they did, but still found himself smiling and looking on his past with warmth. Their connecting to him clouded the big picture. They would never see what had happened as justifiable because it involved him. He could accept it, though, and move on. It doesn't sound like most of his plan worked out really, Lily stated, voice still clipped with fury in having to speak of Snape's part in all of this. She still felt acid on her tongue. He'd used loving her to validate everything he'd done, even if it was the good mixed in with the bad. Snape didn't manage to pull off much of anything useful in the end. He only got those memories to Harry by chance. Was there even a backup for Harry to learn all this? What would have happened if Harry had just been in the battle and Voldemort killed him outright while Harry was defending himself? I would hazard a guess. It would still work out the same, James tried. Voldemort's spell still would have killed the part of his own soul in Harry. This would still have happened. I guess that's why Dumbledore was so insistent Voldemort had to be the one to do it. Anybody else would have killed, well, both souls, he finished quietly. Remus shivered as he finished. Harry was going to go back. The only question remained, what was he going back to? HP asterisk, I'll admit, I came very close to doing just that. I thought it would be an interesting piece, to just have Harry's thoughts alone as he went through one chapter on his own, but I couldn't do it to the others, just didn't feel right. I never denied Harry was born there, I just said they never lived there. Retcon of my own work, possibly, but I don't think what I offered is a divergence of canon either, so I'm sticking with it. Yes, I forgot this line existed, and nobody corrected me the entire fic. 2.